Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was the summer of 1971. The kind of summer that seems to stretch on forever when you're a kid. I was 16, and the days were just this long, hot blur of boredom and trying to find something, anything to do. That's how we ended up deep in the Okefenokee swamp in southeastern Georgia that day, me and my 6 friends. We weren't stupid. We knew the swamp. We'd been fishing and exploring its edges for years. But this particular bay area, was new to us. Thicker, quieter, the kind of place that made you speak in a hush even before anything happened. The air was so thick with humidity you could almost drink it. It was late afternoon, and the sun was cutting through the cypress trees in these heavy, hot beams, lighting up the clouds of gnats that swarmed around our heads. We were just trudging along, our sneakers sinking into the muck with every step, the smell of rot and stagnant water filling our noses. We were joking around, but quietly, you know? The place demanded it. It was just too big, too old to be loud in. That's when we first heard it. It wasn't a normal sound, not a frog plopping into the water, not a gator sliding off a bank. This was a heavy, rhythmic splashing, like someone was running through knee-deep water, a steady thwump, thwump, thwump. We all just froze at the same time. No one had to say anything. We looked at each other, and every face had the same question. Who the hell else would be out here, and why would they be running like that? We moved off the little game trail we'd been following and started creeping toward the sound, using the big cypress knees and ferns for cover. The splashing got louder, and with it, this other sound, a low, guttural kind of grunting noise. My heart was already starting to thump hard in my chest, a nervous, excited kind of beat. We were thinking maybe it was a poacher or some crazy hermit. We pushed through a final curtain of Spanish moss and saw the bay open up in front of us, and that's when we saw it. It's one thing to hear stories. It's another thing to see it with your own eyes, to have your brain try to make sense of something that makes no sense at all. It was huge. I'm not good with estimating height, but it had to be close to 8 feet tall, and it was built like a refrigerator, just solid. It was covered in this shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the shadowy light, and it was wet and matted with mud. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees as it stood there in the shallow water. Its head was kind of blocky, with a wide, flat face. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. This wasn't a bear. It moved differently. It was standing on 2 legs for one thing, perfectly balanced. It had its back to us, and it was focused on something in the water. We watched, barely breathing, as it plunged one of those long arms into the murk, and its hand came back up clutching a cottonmouth snake. The snake was big, thick as my forearm, and it was writhing and coiling around its wrist. The creature didn't even seem to notice. It just brought the snake up to its face, and in one motion, it bit down on the snake's head. I heard the crunch, this sickening wet pop even from 50 feet away. The snake's body went limp, just dangling from its grip. We were all just statues. I could feel the mud seeping through the knees of my jeans where I was crouching. I could hear the buzzing of a fly right by my ear. I could smell the metallic tang of my own sweat. My mind was screaming, but my body was frozen. This was impossible. This was something from a magazine, not from the swamp behind my house. Then, one of my friends, I don't even know who, made a noise. It might have been a gasp, or maybe his foot slipped in the mud. It wasn't loud, but in that dead silence, it was like a gunshot. The creature went still. It dropped the rest of the snake into the water with a soft splash, and then it started to turn its head. It was slow, deliberate. Its head swiveled on this massive neck, and its eyes, these dark, deep-set eyes, locked right onto our hiding spot. There was no intelligence there that I could recognize, not like a person's. but there was a sharp, predatory awareness. It saw us. It knew exactly where we were. A low growl started deep in its chest. It wasn't a loud roar, not like in the movies. It was deeper than that, a vibration that I felt in my own ribs, more than I heard with my ears. It built and built, and then it came out, this guttural, furious sound that seemed to suck all the other noise out of the swamp. The birds stopped singing. The insects went quiet. The only sound was that growl, and it made my ears ring. A high-pitched whine like I'd been standing too close to a speaker. The sound was pure threat. It was a promise. That's when the terror hit. Not the nervous excitement from before, but a cold, sharp fear that shot straight down my spine and turned my legs to water. It took a step toward us, then another, and then it charged. It didn't run like a man. It was this powerful, loping sprint, its long arms pumping, its feet sending up huge geysers of water and mud with every stride. The sound was incredible, a crashing, splashing, snapping cacophony as it plowed through saw palmettos and low-hanging branches without even slowing down. It was fast, so much faster than anything that big had a right to be. The distance between us, which had felt safe just seconds ago, was vanishing in heartbeats. Someone screamed, "Run!" But we were already moving. It was a blind, panicked flight. There was no thought, no plan. Just run. Get away. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break out. My lungs burned with every gulp of the thick, humid air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear it. I could feel the vibrations of its footsteps through the ground. We crashed through the undergrowth, thorns tearing at our arms and faces, branches whipping back into the person behind you. I tripped over a cypress root and went down hard, my hands and knees sinking into the foul-smelling muck. I scrambled back up, my body moving on pure instinct, not even feeling the cuts. Mud was everywhere, in my eyes, my mouth, soaking my clothes. The only thing in my head was the sound of it behind us, getting closer. Its breathing was this heavy, huffing sound, like a locomotive. I risked one glance over my shoulder. It was a mistake. It was maybe 30 feet back, its dark hair plastered to its body with water and sweat, its face a mask of raw fury. Its eyes were still fixed on me, on us. I saw its powerful thigh muscles bunch as it leaped over a fallen log we'd had to scramble under. It was gaining. We weren't going to make it. We burst out of the thicker brush and onto a slightly more open path, our sneakers slipping on the wet ground. My legs were screaming. My side had a stitch so bad it felt like I was being stabbed. I could hear my friends sobbing and gasping for air around me. We were done. We had nothing left. And then we hit a sandy rise. It wasn't a hill, really, just a long, low bank of pale sand that separated the darker, peaty soil from the water's edge. We stumbled onto it, our feet finally finding some purchase, and we just kept running, expecting to feel a massive hand close around our necks at any second. But the sound stopped. The crashing, the huffing, the snapping of branches, it all just ceased. I stumbled to a halt, my chest heaving, and turned around, my whole body trembling so hard I could barely stand. The others did the same. We stood there on that sandy rise, 7 terrified kids, covered in mud and blood and sweat, and we looked back the way we came. The creature was there. It had stopped right at the edge of the sand. It was standing at the tree line, its chest heaving, its fists clenched at its sides. It wasn't trying to hide. It was just watching us. Its dark eyes scanned over each of us, and it let out one last low growl, a sound that was more of a warning than the previous promise of violence. It was a line. It was telling us this was its territory, and we had crossed it. It stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then, without another sound, it turned and melted back into the shadows of the swamp. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible shape, and the next, the foliage had swallowed it up and it was gone. We didn't move, we just stood there shaking, listening. The normal sounds of the swamp slowly started to return. A frog croaked, a bird called, but we couldn't hear it moving away. It was just gone. We finally collapsed right there on the sand. No one spoke. We just sat in the mud on our knees, our heads down, trying to catch our breath and trying to process what had just happened. The adrenaline was fading and the pain started to set in. My arms and face were stinging from a dozen different cuts. My muscles felt like jelly, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, hard knot of fear that had settled deep in my gut. We took the longest way back we could think of, sticking to the open high ground, walking in a tight, silent group. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made us jump. We didn't talk about what we saw. What was there to say? Who would believe us? We just walked. And the image of that thing biting the head off that snake, turning its head, charging at us, was burned into the back of my eyelids. We never went back to that part of the swamp. Not that summer, not the next, not for years. We'd still go fishing in the safer, more familiar spots, but our eyes were always on the tree line, our ears always straining for a sound that didn't belong. We were forever haunted by it. Not just by its brute strength or the sheer size of it, but by the way it looked at us. It wasn't a dumb animal. It saw us. It knew we didn't belong there. And that close call, that feeling of being prey, of being so completely and utterly outmatched, it left a mark on all of us. It left us with a deep, permanent fear of the unknown depths of that swamp, a place we thought we knew, a place that had been hiding something we still can't explain. I still don't know what it was. I just know what I saw, and I know that Sandy Rise was the only thing that saved us. It stopped right there. It just stopped. Story 2. It was one of those late October days in Indiana where the air starts getting that bite to it, the kind that makes you glad to be inside with a hot coffee. This was last year. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd just gotten off a long shift the day before and was enjoying my first real day off in a while. The house was quiet, my wife was at work, and I was just puttering around, letting the dog out, thinking about what to make for lunch. Our property backs up against a pretty dense stretch of woods. It's not wilderness or anything, but it's thick enough that you can't see more than 50 feet into it during the summer. By late October, a lot of the leaves are down, so you can see a little deeper. I was standing at the big kitchen window that looks out over the backyard, just sipping my coffee and staring at nothing in particular. The yard slopes down for about 200 yards before it meets the tree line. It's a decent-sized piece of land. I remember the light was that flat, grey kind you get on an overcast fall day. No shadows, everything just looked kind of muted. I was about to turn away and refill my mug when I saw movement at the edge of the woods. My first thought, my absolute first thought was, oh great, it's old man Peterson. He's a neighbor who hunts on his own land, which butts up against this section of woods, and he sometimes wanders a little close to our property line. But he always, and I mean always, wears a blazing orange vest and hat. You can see him from a mile away. This wasn't orange. This was a dark shape, brown or black, just stepping out from between two big oaks. It was tall. I remember thinking it must be a big guy, a really big guy, because it made the trees look smaller. I thought it was a he at the time, was just standing there facing the field, and he was covered. I mean completely covered, head to toe, in what I assumed was one of those ghillie suits. You know, the camouflage suits hunters wear that are all shaggy and stringy to break up their outline. But this was different. It wasn't the neat, manufactured kind you buy at a sporting goods store. This looked matted, thick. The material hanging from his arms and legs and head looked less like fabric strips and more like long, shaggy hair or mossy fur. It was a uniform dark brown, almost black in places, and it swayed just a little in the breeze. I squinted, trying to get a better look. At 200 yards, you can't see a face. It was just a dark shape under where the head would be. I remember feeling a little annoyed. Who is this guy trespassing, and why is he wearing such stupid camouflage? It wasn't even deer season for rifles yet. It felt wrong. Then he noticed me. I know he did, because he froze, not like a person freezes when they're startled, where they might flinch or take a step back. This was an instant, absolute stillness. 1 second he was a figure standing at the wood's edge. The next, he was a statue. He didn't turn his head. I don't think he even moved a muscle. He just stopped. It was so complete, so immediate, that it was unnerving. It was the kind of stillness a deer uses when it thinks it's been spotted. You blend in, you become part of the scenery. A little chill went down my back, the kind that's not from the cold. My coffee mug felt suddenly warm in my hands. I just stood there staring at him, and he stayed frozen. The longer I looked, the more the shape seemed to resolve. The shaggy covering wasn't just on a suit, it seemed to be him. The arms were too long, hanging down past where a man's knees would be. The shoulders were massive, way too broad for even a huge football player. The head wasn't really a distinct shape. It just sort of blended into the shoulders, a dark mass with no visible neck. My brain was scrambling for a logical explanation, a really dedicated hunter, a weirdo in a costume. But it was a Tuesday morning in the middle of nowhere. It didn't fit. My dog, a 50-pound mutt who thinks he's a tough guy, started whining from the living room. He hadn't barked, he was just whining, a low, scared sound in his throat. That's when the real fear started to prickle at the back of my neck. My dog barks at squirrels, at the mailman, at leaves blowing the wrong way. He doesn't whine and hide. I must have stared at that thing for a full minute, maybe 2. It never moved a millimeter. It was like watching a picture. My eyes started to feel dry from not blinking. I needed to do something. I thought, maybe if I look away and look back, it'll break the spell. It'll just be a stump or a trick of the light. That's what I told myself. It's a trick of the light. So I did it. I glanced down at my dog, who was now pressed against my leg, trembling. It was a quick look, no more than 4 or 5 seconds. I gave his head a pat, said, "It's okay, buddy," more for me than for him, and I looked back up at the tree line. He was gone. The space between the 2 oak trees was empty. My heart just dropped into my stomach. It was a physical sensation, like a punch. Gone. How? There was no sound. The woods were dead quiet. No rustling leaves, no snapping twigs. Nothing. He couldn't have just vanished. A man that size, in that kind of suit, doesn't move silently or quickly. He'd have to crash through the underbrush. I stood there, frozen myself now, my eyes scanning the tree line frantically. I was looking for movement, for a dark shape, for anything. But there was nothing. Just grey trees and the dark, empty space between them. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's listening back to you. That's when the thought, the real terrifying thought, hit me. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a hunter. That thing wasn't trying to blend in with the environment for hunting. It was trying to blend in because I had seen it. And when I looked away, it didn't run. It just left, or it moved somewhere I couldn't see it. The idea that it was still out there, watching me from the deeper shadows of the woods, was paralyzing. I stumbled back from the window, my legs feeling weak. I grabbed my dog, and we just sat on the couch in the living room, away from the windows. I didn't know what to do. Call the police and say what? I saw a big, hairy man who stood really still and then disappeared. They'd think I was crazy. I felt crazy. I just sat there, holding my dog, listening to the absolute silence from outside for what felt like an hour. Every little creak of the house made me jump. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of my wife's car pulling into the driveway. The afternoon light was already starting to fade. I felt groggy and disoriented, and for a second I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing. But the knot of cold fear in my gut was still there. I didn't tell her right away. What was I going to say? We had a normal evening, made dinner, watched TV. But I was on edge. Every time I looked out the back window, now dark with night, I felt a jolt of anxiety. I kept the curtains closed. The incident kind of faded into the background over the next couple of weeks, becoming this weird, unexplained thing that I'd push out of my mind. Then, something else happened that brought it all screaming back. It was a Saturday a few weeks later. The weather was nicer, crisp but sunny. My wife wanted to take some pictures of me with the fall colors for a family photo album. She dragged me out into the backyard, right to the spot where I usually stand to look out at the woods. She had me pose with my back to the tree line, wearing my big, puffy winter coat. It's a bulky thing, makes me look bigger than I am. She took a few pictures and then showed them to me on her phone screen, and that's when my blood ran cold. In the picture, I looked small. I'm not a small guy. I'm 5'9", and I weigh 210 pounds. I work a physical job. I've got broad shoulders. In my big coat, I should have looked like a linebacker, but in that picture, with the vast expanse of the field and the wall of trees behind me, I just looked like a man, a normal-sized man. And all I could think about was the figure I'd seen. I held my hand up at the screen, trying to gauge the scale from memory. That thing, from the same distance, would have been twice my size. Twice. If I was a normal man in that photo, that thing would have been a giant. It wasn't just tall, it was massive. The proportions I'd seen, the immense shoulders, the long arms, it all clicked into a horrifying new perspective. My wife was talking about the lighting, but I wasn't hearing her. I was just staring at my own image, feeling a profound, deep-seated dread. I had dismissed it as a large man. It wasn't. It was something else entirely. A few days after the original sighting, we'd been woken up in the middle of the night by a sound, a scream. It was long and drawn out, high-pitched, and it sounded like a woman in absolute terror. It came from the direction of the woods. It went on for what felt like a full minute before it just cut off. The silence afterwards was somehow worse. My wife had sat straight up in bed and said, "What in God's name was that?" She's from around here, and after a minute, she said it must have been a bobcat. She read online that they can sound just like a screaming woman. I'd clung to that explanation. A bobcat. It made sense. But standing there, looking at that photo of myself, the memory of that scream fused with the memory of that dark, still figure. A bobcat scream is a territorial thing, a mating call. It's an animal sound. This felt different. It felt intentional. It felt like it came from a throat that wasn't meant to make a sound like that. After seeing that thing, the bobcat explanation felt flimsy, like a sheet of paper trying to cover a hole in a dam. It didn't fit. Nothing fit. I never went back into those woods. I used to walk the property line all the time, just to check fences, clear brush. I don't do that anymore. I look out that kitchen window every single day, multiple times a day. I look at that spot between the two oak trees. Sometimes I'll see a deer or a turkey, and my heart will hammer for a second before my brain catches up. But I've never seen it again. I've turned it over and over in my head for a year now. A hunter in a strange suit. A bear standing on its hind legs. A prank. My mind serves up every possible explanation. But they all crumble when I remember the absolute, instantaneous stillness, the complete and total silence when it vanished, the sheer, impossible size of it, and that scream in the night that I can't confidently attribute to any animal I know. I don't know what I saw. I just know that it saw me. It knew I was watching, and it decided to become invisible. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up some nights, is the certainty that it's still out there. It was there before me, and it'll be there after I'm gone. I just happened to glance out my window at the wrong time, or the right time. And for a few moments the curtain was pulled back. I saw something that wasn't meant for me to see, and I have to live with the fact that I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted, and I don't know why it let me see it. I just don't know. Story 3. It was early June 1991. The air was warm, but not heavy yet. The kind of day that makes you want to be outside before the real summer heat bakes everything to a crisp. My son was just a little guy then, maybe 5 years old, still small enough that the world was mostly a big, exciting adventure. I'd promised him we'd go get pine cones. It sounds silly now, but back then it was a big deal. We were going to make Christmas decorations with them, even though it was months away. He was so excited he could barely sit still in the truck. We drove north out of French Gulch, California, taking the main road until it turned to gravel. And then that gravel turned into a dirt track that was really more of a suggestion than a road. It was rough, winding up into the hills, climbing through these dense stands of pine and oak. The truck, an old Ford pickup that had seen better days, rattled and bounced over the ruts. My boy loved it, laughing every time we hit a bump and his booster seat jiggled. I remember the dust pluming up behind us, coating the back window in a fine, reddish-brown film. I found a spot to pull over, a little wider section of the track where the trees opened up a bit. It wasn't a proper clearing, just a place where you could get the truck mostly off the road. I turned off the engine, and that silence just rushed in. It's a different kind of quiet up there. Not peaceful exactly. It's a heavy quiet, a listening quiet. You get the feeling everything else is just waiting for you to make a move. We got out, and I gave my son a small burlap sack I'd brought. "Okay, buddy," I said. "Look for the big ones, the good ones without too many bugs in them." He took his job very seriously, toddling around with his head down, completely focused on the forest floor. I started doing the same, my back to the truck, scanning the carpet of needles and leaves. The air smelled amazing, dry pine, warm earth, that sweet dusty scent of manzanita. The sun was dappling through the branches, and for a while, it was just perfect. Just me and my boy doing something simple. I was bent over, my fingers closing around a perfect, tightly wound cone, when I heard it. It wasn't a sound that belonged. It came from the ridge above us, maybe a couple hundred yards up the steep hillside, a low, moaning cry. It wasn't an animal sound I knew. It wasn't a coyote's yip or a mountain lion's scream. It was deeper, throatier. It was a groan of pure weight. It sounded sad and angry all at once, like something in immense pain or possessing immense rage. It vibrated in my chest more than my ears. The hair on my arms stood straight up. My head snapped toward the sound, and I saw my son had frozen too, his little sack dangling from his hand, his eyes wide and looking at me for an explanation. I didn't have one. Then the second sound started. Heavy, powerful steps. Not the light, quick patter of a deer or the clumsy shuffle of a bear. These were strides. Long, deliberate, crashing strides, like someone was taking huge steps and just plowing through the undergrowth, not caring what they broke. Crunch, crash, thump. The ground actually shook with each one. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. It was coming down the hillside, straight toward us, and it was moving fast. Unbelievably fast. Panic is a cold fire that starts in your gut and explodes outwards. It's not a thought, it's a chemical reaction. My brain just short-circuited. Every story, every warning, every primal instinct I had screamed one word. Run. I dropped the pine cone I was holding. Get to the truck. I yelled at my son, but my voice was a strangled croak. He was already moving, his little legs churning, fear giving him speed. I didn't run after him, I sprinted. It was a blind, frantic dash. My heart wasn't just beating, it was trying to hammer its way out of my ribcage. My lungs burned after just a few steps. I remember the sound of my own boots pounding the dirt, the stupid jingle of my keys in my pocket, and underneath it all, that terrible, earth-shaking crunch, crash, crunch getting closer. So much closer. The sound wasn't just in front of us anymore. It was all around, echoing off the hills, like we were in a bowl and this thing was coming from every direction at once. I could hear branches snapping like gunshots. It was so loud, so violent. I risked a glance over my shoulder as I ran, and I saw the small trees on the hillside whipping back and forth, a visible line of destruction heading right for the spot where we'd just been standing. My son reached the passenger side door and fumbled with the handle. I got to the driver's side, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. It was an old truck. You had to unlock it from the outside. The crashing was so close now, I could feel the individual thumps in my teeth. I finally got the key in, turned it and yanked the door open. I practically threw myself inside, scrambling across the bench seat. My son was crying now, a quiet, terrified whimper as he clambered in after me. I slammed my door shut and hit the lock button. The sound was useless, a little plastic click that felt like a joke against the raw power that was descending on us. I shoved the key into the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, a horrifyingly long pause, and then roared to life. The sound of the engine was suddenly the most beautiful, reassuring sound in the world. My eyes went to the rearview mirror. At first I just saw the dust we'd kicked up hanging in the air, then something moved in it, something huge. I stomped on the gas, the tires spun, kicking up more dirt and gravel, and the truck lurched forward. As we started moving, the red glow of my tail lights cut through the settling dust cloud behind us, and that's when I saw it. In the twin red circles of my tail lights right behind the truck was a shape, a massive dark shape. It was upright on two legs, and it was towering over the bed of my pickup. I have a long bed Ford. This thing made it look like a toy. It had no neck that I could see. Its head seemed to sit directly on its massive, rounded shoulders. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick, like tree trunks. It was covered in hair, dark brown or black, that was matted and shaggy. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. I've been close to bears. This was not a bear. A bear has a slope to its back, a different proportion. This thing was built like a man, but a man scaled up to a nightmare size. It was just standing there for a split second, caught in the red light, and I got the overwhelming, gut-churning feeling that it had just stopped, that it had been charging us and had pulled up short right as we moved. I didn't stare. I couldn't. I wrenched my eyes forward, my hands glued to the steering wheel, my foot pressing the accelerator to the floor. The truck fishtailed on the narrow dirt road. We were going too fast for the terrain. Branches scraped and screeched along the sides of the truck. I was driving purely on instinct, my body rigid with terror. The sudden lurch and the sound of the engine woke my son fully. He'd been dozing off before all this started. "Daddy, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice small and scared. I couldn't form words. I just shook my head, my eyes darting between the winding road ahead and the rearview mirror. The mirror was empty now, just showing a tunnel of darkness behind us, but I was terrified of seeing those two red pinpricks of light reflecting back at me, or worse, that huge dark shape loping after us. I took a turn too fast, the tires on my side slipping off the hard-packed dirt and into the soft shoulder. The truck tilted alarmingly. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought we were going to roll. I screamed, a raw, involuntary sound, and cranked the wheel hard, fighting for control. The tires caught, and the truck slammed back onto the road with a jarring thud. My son started crying in earnest then, big, heaving sobs. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I drove like a man possessed, down that mountain, my knuckles white on the wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The image of that thing in my taillights was burned onto the back of my eyelids, the sheer size of it. The way it just stood there, so impossibly tall and broad, the way the light glinted off what must have been its eyes, 2 points of dull reflection in that shaggy darkness. We didn't stop until the dirt road turned back to gravel, and then until the gravel turned to paved road, and then until we were down in the valley, surrounded by houses and streetlights. I pulled into the parking lot of a closed-down gas station, the engine still running. I just sat there, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. It was a deep, cellular shaking, like every muscle in my body had been wound up to the breaking point and then released all at once. I couldn't get my hands to be still. I felt cold and hot at the same time. My son had quieted down, just sniffling. He looked at me, his face pale in the dashboard lights. "Was that a bear, Daddy?" he asked. I looked at him, this little boy who still trusted me to know the answers, to keep him safe. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to give him that simple, comfortable explanation that would let him sleep at night, but I couldn't. The lie wouldn't come out. My throat was too tight. I just shook my head again and finally managed to speak, my voice hoarse. "I don't know, son. I just don't know." But I did know. In that deep primal part of your brain that recognizes predators and threats on a level older than language, I knew. It was a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, a thing that wasn't supposed to be real, and it had been right there. It had been coming for us. I sat in that parking lot for a long time, just shaking, watching the road behind us in the mirror, expecting to see something emerge from the darkness. Nothing ever did. We drove home in silence. I put my son to bed, and he fell asleep almost instantly, the resilience of childhood already smoothing over the sharp edges of his fear. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with all the lights on, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, and I just stared at the wall. The fear didn't fade. It settled in, a permanent resident in the pit of my stomach. That was over 30 years ago. My son is a grown man now, and he still thinks it was just a scary bear encounter, a story from when he was a kid. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know the way the ground shook under its feet. I know the smell of my own terror sweat and the feel of the cold truck key in my slick palm. I know the exact shade of red the taillights cast on that dark, matted hair. I've spent decades since then reading every account, every report, every blurry piece of film, trying to find something that matches what I experienced that day in early June. I found a lot of stories that come close, but none of them carry the same visceral, personal horror. None of them have that ending. Not an ending, really, just a stopping point. A moment where you get away, but you know with a certainty that never leaves you, that you were not supposed to, that you were seen, that something out there in the old quiet woods knows that you were there too. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent, I can still hear it. That low, moaning cry and the sound of the world breaking as it came down the hill. Story 4. I was driving, and my friend was in the passenger seat, half dozing, his head leaning against the window. We'd been on the road for hours, and that particular kind of tiredness had set in, the kind where your eyes feel gritty and the world outside the windshield starts to feel a little unreal. The road was empty. I hadn't seen another car's headlights for what felt like 20 minutes. It was just us, the dark and the endless wall of trees. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 100 yards or so, something was moving in the road. My first thought, the automatic one, was that it was a deer. You see a lot of them on back roads like this, especially at night, but my brain registered the shape as wrong even before I started to slow down. It was lower to the ground than a deer, and the way it moved was off. It wasn't a graceful bound, it was a loping, heavy sort of motion, like it was hurt. I remember my foot coming off the gas and hovering over the brake, not slamming it, just easing us down, thinking, okay, it's a wounded animal, a big dog, maybe a bear cub. I didn't want to hit it. As we got closer, the headlights finally caught it fully, and that's when the first cold trickle of something other than confusion went down my spine. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a bear. It was crossing the road from the driver's side to the passenger side, and it was moving on all fours, but its back legs were all wrong, kind of bent and powerful looking, and its front, Its front were arms, long, thick arms, like a man's but covered in hair, and they ended in hands that were pressing into the asphalt. It was big. I'd say the top of its back was level with the hood of my Ranger, and my truck wasn't a small vehicle. I had slowed to a crawl now, maybe 5 miles an hour, just rolling forward. My friend stirred, lifting his head from the window. "What's up?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the thing in the road. It had reached the center line, and then it just stopped. It didn't freeze in panic like a deer would. It stopped deliberately and turned its upper body towards us. It swung its head and shoulders around to face the passenger side of the truck, and that's when I saw its face. The headlights from my truck were hitting it directly now, and I swear to God my blood went cold. It wasn't an animal's face. It was human-like, but not human. It had a heavy brow ridge, and underneath that, 2 eyes that burned like red coals. They weren't reflecting the light like a deer's eyes do. They seemed to be generating their own hellish, deep red light from within. They were set deep in its skull, and they were fixed right on us, right on me and my friend. Its body was covered in 2 kinds of hair. The main part of its torso and legs had this short, dense fur, almost like a German shepherd's, dark brown or black in the headlights. But from its head, down its back and along its arms, it had this longer, shaggier, bushy hair that was matted and wild. The combination made it look even more unnatural, like 2 different animals stitched together. But the worst part, the part that haunts me even now, was the expression on its face. It wasn't blank, it wasn't curious. It was pure, undiluted hatred. Its mouth was a tight, lipless line, and the skin around its snout, because it did have a sort of snout, not flat like a person's face, was pulled back in a silent snarl. Every line of its face was twisted with this menacing, intelligent malice. It looked at us like we were something it despised, something it wanted to tear apart. I felt that hatred like a physical blow. It was so intense, so personal, that it stole the air from my lungs. My friend was fully awake now. I heard his sharp intake of breath, a little choked sound in the back of his throat. He was staring, frozen, his body rigid against the seat. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. But it wasn't really a question. It was a statement of pure, unadulterated terror. The creature just held its position, one of its long-fingered hands still planted on the yellow line of the road, its head turned, those red eyes pinning us in place. It wasn't moving. It was just staring, assessing. The hate in its gaze was so palpable I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a cold, heavy knot of dread. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, cold and clammy. The air in the cab of the truck felt thick, charged with a kind of static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. Time seemed to stretch and warp. We were just sitting there, a man and his friend in a pickup truck, locked in a staring contest with a nightmare from the woods. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. I could smell the faint scent of pine from the air freshener mixed with the smell of my own fear, a coppery, sour odor. My friend hadn't moved a muscle. He was just staring back, his face a mask of pale shock. The thought crossed my mind, a stupid, insane thought given the circumstances. Turn the wheel, get a better look from my side. The driver's side window was down a crack, and for a split second I considered turning the truck slightly to let my headlights illuminate it from a different angle. But I didn't. A deeper, primal instinct screamed at me not to. It felt like a challenge. It felt like if I moved, if I acknowledged it any more than we already had, it would break whatever fragile, terrifying truce was holding it there on the road. So I stayed dead still, my foot resting on the brake pedal, the engine idling rough, and then it moved. It didn't startle or run. It turned its head back towards the woods on the passenger side, and with a motion that was both powerful and unnervingly fluid, it pushed off with its arms and loped into the tree line. It didn't crash through the underbrush. It just seemed to melt into the darkness, the shadows swallowing it up in 2, maybe 3 strides. 1 second it was there, a solid, impossible thing in the road, and the next it was gone. The road was empty again. I didn't wait. My foot slammed down on the gas pedal. The old truck's engine roared and we shot forward. I didn't look towards the trees where it had disappeared. I kept my eyes glued to the road in front of me, my body tense, expecting at any moment for those red eyes to reappear, for that thing to come lunging out of the darkness. My friend finally broke his silence. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice shaky and high-pitched. "Did you fucking see that?" "Yeah." I managed to grunt, my own voice tight. "I saw it." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the wind rushing past the windows and the straining engine. The normal world felt 1,000,000 miles away. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see it following us, running down the center of the road behind the truck, but there was nothing. Just empty blacktop fading into the night. My friend kept talking, the words tumbling out of him in a nervous rush. What was that? A bear. That wasn't a bear. Its face was like a person's, a mean person, and its eyes, they were red, man. They were glowing red. "I know," I said, my mind racing, trying to process, to find a logical box to put the thing in. A sick bear, a gorilla that escaped from a zoo, but this was rural South Carolina. There were no zoos for miles, and gorillas don't have eyes that glow red with pure hatred. They don't move like that with those long, purposeful arms. We both fell silent again. The initial shock was wearing off, leaving behind a deep, cold unease that settled into our bones. I remember my hands were still trembling on the wheel. I had to consciously make an effort to unclench my jaw. We kept driving, pushing the truck faster than was safe on that winding road, both of us just wanting to put as much distance between us and that spot as possible. After about 10 minutes, we saw the glow of a gas station and a diner up ahead, a little oasis of electric light in the sea of darkness. I pulled into the parking lot, the tires crunching on the gravel. I turned off the engine, and for a long moment, we just sat there in the sudden, heavy silence. The fluorescent lights of the diner cast a sickly yellow glow inside the cab. My friend turned to me, his face still pale. "It looked hurt, didn't it?" he said, his voice quieter now. The way it was moving at first, before it stopped. It was limping or something, I thought back. He was right. That initial loping motion had a hitch in it, a slight drag on one of its back legs. In that first second before the terror had fully set in, my brain had registered it as a wounded animal, but the way it had stopped and stared, that wasn't the behavior of a wounded animal. A wounded animal is scared, vulnerable. That thing wasn't scared. It was menacing. The hatred in its expression wasn't the fear of a cornered beast. It was the active, aggressive hatred of a predator. We went into the diner, more for the light and the presence of other people than out of any real desire for coffee. We sat in a booth by the window, and we didn't talk about it. Not there. We just nursed our coffees, our eyes occasionally darting towards the dark tree line across the road. Every time the door to the diner opened, we both flinched. We eventually got back on the road and drove the rest of the way home in near silence, the radio off. The memory of that thing was sitting between us in the cab, a third passenger we couldn't ignore. We didn't stop again until we hit the Florida state line. We talked about it once, a few days later, when the shock had subsided enough to form coherent sentences. We compared what we saw, confirming the details to each other. The bushy hair on top of the short fur, the impossibly long arms, the human-like but utterly alien face, and those red, hate-filled eyes. We never came up with an answer. We never reported it to anyone. Who would we tell? The police? They'd think we were drunk or crazy. A news station? It would be a joke. The memory of its appearance has never left me. It's been years, but I can still close my eyes and see it standing there in the road, turned towards us, its body a mass of conflicting textures, and its face a mask of pure malice. I can still feel the chill that went down my spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown, it was the fear of being seen, of being looked at with such intelligent, focused hatred by something that should not exist. It was the feeling that we had stumbled into a place where we weren't supposed to be, and we had been seen by something that guarded that place. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. All I know is that on a hot summer night in 1994, on a dark road in Okin County, my best friend and I saw something that we were never meant to see, and the memory of its face full of hate is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Story 5. Okay, I'll try to write this out like it really happened to me. I'm still kind of shaky even thinking about it, and it's been a few weeks now. I need to get it out there because I can't really talk to anyone about it except my sister, and we both just get quiet and weird whenever it comes up. So here goes. It was a Friday night, late, probably around midnight. My sister and I were driving home from a thing she had over in the next town. It was one of those craft fair events she likes to sell her pottery at, and I'd agreed to drive her because her car was in the shop. I remember being tired, just bone tired, because I'd been up since 5 in the morning for work. The event ran long, and we were some of the last people packing up. By the time we hit the road, it was already past 11:30. The drive home is through this part of Wyoming that's mostly just empty. Not desert empty, but wooded and hilly. There's a big rodeo grounds off the main highway, and then you turn onto this dirt road that cuts through a thick patch of forest for a few miles before it spits you out near my place. I've driven it 100 times, day and night. It's usually no big deal. A little creepy sometimes when it's pitch black, but you get used to it. That night was different, though. It was one of those nights where the air felt heavy, you know, like before a storm. But there wasn't a storm in the forecast. It was cool, but not cold. The kind of weather where you roll the window down just a crack to let some air in, and the smell of pine and damp earth fills the car. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station that was starting to get staticky. My sister was dozing in the passenger seat, her head leaning against the window. The headlights cut a path through the darkness, but beyond that, it was just black, the kind of black where you can't see the trees until you're right on top of them. We'd just passed the rodeo grounds. I remember seeing the dark outline of the grandstands and the empty pens to my left. Then I took the turn onto the dirt road. The car jostled a little as we left the pavement. Gravel pinged against the undercarriage. I remember thinking I should probably slow down a bit. The road gets winding, and there are potholes that'll jolt you right out of your seat if you hit them wrong. I was maybe a mile down this road, just starting to get into the thicker trees, when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer. You see a lot of deer out here, especially at night. They freeze in the headlights, and you have to slow down and wait for them to move. But this was bigger, and it was walking, not darting, not grazing, just walking right down the middle of the road with a purpose. A slow, heavy, deliberate walk. My brain took a second to catch up. I eased my foot off the gas, squinting. The high beams were on, so the thing was lit up pretty good. It was tall, really tall, and covered in this dark, shaggy hair. It wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears out here, and they don't walk upright like that, not for that long, and they're stockier. This thing had long arms, and its legs moved like a man's, but it was huge. The sheer size of it is what hit me first. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were massive. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, a dull, fast rhythm. "What the hell is that?" I muttered, more to myself than anything. The sound of my voice woke my sister up. She stirred, blinked, and looked ahead. "Why are we slowing down?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. Then she saw it. She didn't scream. It was worse than a scream. She just made this small, choked sound in the back of her throat, like all the air had been punched out of her. Her hand flew out and gripped my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. The creature was still walking, not even 20 yards ahead of us now. The road is narrow there, with deep drainage ditches on either side and trees crowding right up to the edge. There was no way to go around it. I couldn't just swerve into the ditch, and turning around wasn't an option either. The road is too narrow to do a three-point turn without backing into the trees. And I wasn't about to put the car in reverse with that thing in front of us, so I had to slow down even more. I was practically crawling, just rolling forward, my foot hovering over the brake. I think I was hoping it would just amble off into the woods. That's what animals do. They get spooked by the car and run. This thing didn't get spooked, it stopped walking. My own breath hitched. The car crept forward another few feet, and the headlights fully engulfed it. The hair wasn't just dark, it was a matted reddish-brown in the glare of the lights, like old rust. It was thick and long, and I could see muscles moving underneath it across its back and shoulders. It was powerfully built, like a weightlifter, but covered in this wild, coarse pelt. And then it turned. It didn't jerk its head around. It turned its whole upper body, slow and deliberate, to face the car. That was the moment. That was the terror moment that's burned into my brain. Its face. It wasn't a bear's face. It wasn't a man's face. It was something else. The eyes. They caught the light and reflected back at us, a dull, reddish glow. They were set deep under a heavy brow, and they were intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but you could feel it. You could feel it looking at us. Not just seeing the car, but seeing us inside the car. It knew we were in there. It just stood there, staring right at us. Its arms hung down by its sides, long and ending in what looked like hands, not paws. It didn't make a sound. No growl, no huff, nothing. The silence was worse than any sound could have been. The only noise was the low rumble of my car's engine and the frantic beating of my own heart in my ears. My sister's grip on my arm was so tight it was cutting off circulation. I could feel her whole body trembling. I was frozen, my hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I couldn't look away from its eyes. I felt like a mouse staring down a snake, completely and utterly paralyzed. This wasn't curiosity. This was an assessment, a threat. I felt in my gut that we were in terrible immediate danger. Time just stretched out. It felt like we sat there for an hour, but it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. The creature didn't move a muscle. It just held its ground, staring us down. I could smell my own fear, a sharp, sour smell. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead and back. My mouth was dry as dust. I remember stupid, specific details. A moth was bouncing around in the headlight beam, fluttering right in front of the creature's chest. It didn't react. I could see individual clumps of mud or something caked on the hair on its lower legs. The sheer bulk of it blocked the entire road. The air coming in through the window crack suddenly felt ice cold. My brain was screaming at me to do something. Go, go, go. But my body wouldn't listen. I was terrified that if I moved, if I hit the gas, it would charge us. It was close enough that it could probably reach the car in 2 or 3 of those long strides. Then it moved. It didn't charge. It just turned its head back, looking down the road ahead, like it had decided we weren't worth its time. Then it took a step, then another, and it moved off the road to the right. It didn't run. It just walked, with that same heavy, purposeful stride, and melted into the tree line. It was there 1 second, and then the shadows just swallowed it up. I didn't hear any branches snap, nothing. It was just gone. The second it disappeared, the spell broke. Go! My sister shrieked, her voice high and panicked. Oh my God, go, go, go! I stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel for a second before catching, and the car lurched forward. I didn't care about potholes anymore. I flew down that dirt road, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting to see it running after us, but there was nothing, just darkness. My sister was crying, quiet, shaky sobs with her hands over her face. I couldn't even comfort her. I was shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. My legs felt like jelly. I drove way too fast the rest of the way home, skidding onto my driveway and practically crashing into the garage door in my hurry to get inside. We ran into the house, locked the door, and then checked every other lock in the place. We didn't say a word to each other for a long time. We just sat in the living room, in the dark, listening. Every little creak of the house made us jump. I kept looking out the window, expecting to see those red eyes staring back from the tree line at the edge of my property. We eventually talked about it, of course. We had to, and we both agreed on what we saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a suit. It was the thing people talk about, the thing you hear stories about in this part of the state. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I'd heard those stories before from other guys at the local diner. Hunters talking about finding strange tracks or hearing wood knocks deep in the woods where no one should be. I always nodded along, but I never really believed it. I thought it was just stories, you know, folks misidentifying animals or playing a prank. I'm not a prank. My sister isn't a prank. What we saw was real. It was solid and massive, and it looked right at us. The intelligence in its eyes, that's the part that haunts me the most. It knew what we were. It saw the fear in us. I haven't driven down that road at night since. I take the long way now, adding an extra 20 minutes to the trip. I can't do it. Every time I even think about it, I get that same cold feeling in my stomach, and I can see it turning to face me, those red eyes locking onto mine. It was just one night, just one drive home, but it changed everything. I go out to get the mail now, and I find myself scanning the tree line. I hear an owl hoot at night, and my whole body tenses up. I saw something out there that I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, and it saw me back, and I have no idea what it was or what it wanted. I just know that for those few seconds, staring into its eyes on that dark, lonely road, I have never, ever been more terrified in my entire life. I don't think I ever will be again. Batitu Story 6. Okay, I'll do my best to tell this like it happened to me. I've never written it all down before, and just thinking about it again makes my hands feel cold. It's been years, but some things don't fade. This was in Lincoln County, Wyoming, middle of August 1985. I was in my early 20s then, and so was my buddy. We were both in really good shape, working construction at the time, so we were strong, used to long days, not the kind to spook easy. His family had hunted in those mountains for years, so he knew the area. I didn't, but I trusted him. We'd talked about this trip for weeks. Just a day hike, nothing crazy. I'd bought a new Ford truck a few months before, blue with a silver trim, and I was proud of it. Driving up there felt good, windows down, the air already smelling like pine and dry earth. We got an early start, left before the sun was fully up, ate a big breakfast at a diner on the way. Eggs, bacon, toast, coffee, no alcohol, not even a beer. We weren't like that. This was about being out there, seeing the wilderness, maybe spotting some elk or moose. The plan was a 9-mile loop his dad had told him about, one that would bring us back to where we parked by late afternoon. The hike up was beautiful, tough in spots, but the kind of tired that feels good. The air was clear and thin, and the sun was warm but not burning. We talked some, but mostly we were quiet, listening. You learn pretty quick out there that noise scares everything away. We saw some deer early on, and later, way off in a meadow, a bull elk with a huge rack. It felt perfect, like we were part of something old and big and peaceful. But the days started getting away from us. We took a long break at the top, just sitting on a rock outcrop, looking at the world spread out below. We lost track of time. By the time we packed up and started heading down, the sun was already dipping behind the peaks. The shadows got long real fast, and the temperature began to drop. That's when we both realized we weren't going to make it back to the truck before dark. I wasn't hugely worried, but I didn't love the idea. I had a good flashlight in my pack, and my friend had one too. We knew roughly where we were. The trail was decent. Still, there's a different feeling once the light starts to go. Sounds get sharper. The woods feel closer. It was around 7:30 in the evening when we knew we were getting close. We could feel it. The trail was starting to level out, and we recognized a particular bend where we'd seen a pile of bear scat on the way in. We were maybe half a mile from the truck, but there was one last obstacle, a small stream we had to cross. It wasn't deep, maybe knee-high at most, but it was about 15 feet wide. We'd hopped across on stones that morning, but in the dark, that wasn't an option. The moon was out, not full, but bright enough to see by. It cast a pale, silvery light that made the pine needles look grey and turned the water black. We waded in. The water was icy cold, a real shock that went right through my boots and jeans. I remember the sucking sound my boots made pulling out of the mud on the other bank, and the heavy, soaked feeling of my denim clinging to my legs. We were on the final stretch, just a straight shot through a thinner part of the forest to the small clearing where I'd parked. We were tired, hungry, and just focused on getting to the truck, getting the heater on, and driving back to town for a hot meal. That's when we saw it. Movement near the truck. My first thought, my only thought, was that someone was messing with it, my new truck. A jolt of pure anger shot through me. We both froze, ducking down instinctively behind a fallen log. My friend grabbed my arm and pointed. There was definitely something or someone moving around the driver's side. It was a dark shape, shifting in the patches of moonlight. We both carried handguns. It was just what you did out there. I had a .357 Magnum revolver in a hip holster, and he had a .44. We weren't looking for trouble, but you hear stories about meth labs or poachers in remote areas. We slipped our guns out, the metal cool in our hands. The plan was simple and unspoken. Sneak closer and see what was going on. If it was just some kids, we'd shout and scare them off. If it was something else, well, we had the firepower. We started moving, not on the trail, but off to the side, using the trees for cover. We were good at moving quietly from hunting, placing our feet carefully to avoid snapping twigs. My heart was thumping in my ears, a mix of adrenaline and that protect your property feeling. The wet cold from my jeans was forgotten. From a couple hundred yards out, the figure was just a tall, dark silhouette against the lighter background of my truck's paint. But I could see it was upright. On two legs, a person, I thought, a tall, lanky person. We kept closing the distance, 75, maybe 100 yards away now. The woods were dead quiet. No crickets, no wind, nothing. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, a soft, dull clunk, like metal lightly bumping against metal. My mind raced. Are they trying to break the window? Pop the lock? We got to within about 40 feet, hiding behind a thick cluster of pine trees. We had a clearer view now, with a gap in the branches. The moon was right behind us, shining toward the truck, and that's when my brain just broke for a second. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It wasn't one figure, it was three. Two of them were huge. I mean massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and these things had to be at least 6.5 feet, maybe pushing 7, and they weren't lanky. They were built, thick, like powerlifters. The third one was shorter, maybe around 5 feet, built more slightly but still solid. They were all covered in hair, not like a grizzly bear, but a thick, shaggy coat, dark brown, almost black in the moonlight. And they had no clothing, nothing, just hair. Their shoulders were enormous, rounded and heavy, making their necks look short and non-existent. Their arms, God, their arms were so long, they hung down past their knees, and their hands. I'll never forget their hands. They were huge, like catcher's mitts with thick fingers. They were just standing there, moving slowly around the truck. One of the big ones was near the front, its head tilted as if it was looking at the grill. The other big one was by the driver's side door. The smaller one was near the bed. The metal bumping sound, I realized, was the one by the door, lightly tapping its huge knuckles against the window glass. Not trying to break it, just tapping, like it was curious. I felt my breath stop in my throat. My friend next to me made a tiny, choked sound, barely a whisper. This wasn't a person. This wasn't a bear. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. The fear that hit me then was a physical thing. It was a cold wave that started in my gut and radiated out, making my fingers tingle and my legs feel like water. It was a primal, gut-level terror that told me I was looking at something I was never meant to see. We must have made a noise, a sharp intake of breath, the rustle of a jacket. I don't know. But the one tapping on the window stopped. Its head, which seemed to sit directly on its huge shoulders, turned. It looked right at us. Its face was flat, dark. I couldn't see eyes, just deep shadows, but I knew it was looking. I felt it. A second later, the other big one turned, then the smaller one. For a heartbeat that felt like an hour, all three of them were completely still, facing our direction. Then they moved. They didn't run like a person. They didn't run like an animal. It was the explosive, powerful launch. All three of them bolted at the same instant, with a speed that was terrifying. They were so fast. The one who had been looking at us, the bigger one by the door, took one last look in our direction, and then it was just a blur of dark motion, crashing into the trees on the far side of the clearing. But it was the smaller one that burned the image into my brain forever. It didn't follow the other two. It ran straight out across the clearing, away from the tree line, directly toward the rising moon. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, it was silhouetted perfectly against that bright silver disk. I saw its whole form upright, legs pumping, those long arms swinging, its dark brown hair almost glowing at the edges from the backlight. Its gait was smooth, powerful, effortless. And then it was gone. Vanished into the shadows on the other side. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. We didn't speak. We didn't look at each other. We just ran. I've never run like that in my life. It was a blind, panicked sprint. My wet jeans felt like they weighed 100 pounds. I crashed through a low bush, not even feeling the branches scratch my face. My only thought was the truck. Get to the truck. We scrambled up the small embankment into the clearing. The truck was just sitting there, looking perfectly normal. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly get them out of my pocket. I dropped them on the gravel. The sound of them hitting the stones was like a gunshot in the silence. My friend snatched them up, his own hands trembling just as much, and shoved them into my hand. I got the key in the lock, yanked the door open, and we piled in, slamming the doors shut. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I jammed it into drive, my foot stomping on the gas before my door was even fully closed. The tires spun on the gravel, spitting rocks, and we fishtailed onto the dirt track. I drove. I don't even remember the first 10 minutes of that drive down the mountain. I just stared ahead, gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles were white. My friend was slumped in his seat, just staring out his window. We didn't say a single word. Not one. There was nothing to say. What could you possibly say? The only sounds were the engine, the tires on the dirt, and our own ragged breathing. We hit the paved road, and I didn't let up. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those long, powerful shapes loping after us down the highway. But there was nothing. Just empty road and dark trees. It was only when the lights of the first town came into view that my friend finally spoke, his voice hoarse. What the hell was that? I just shook my head. I had no answer. We stopped at a gas station for coffee, just to have something to do with our hands. They were still shaking. We tried to tell one of our co-workers about it a few days later, over a beer. He just laughed. He thought we were messing with him. or that we'd seen a bear on its hind legs and spooked ourselves. We didn't bother trying to tell anyone else after that. What was the point? But my family knew. I told my dad, and he just looked at me for a long time. He knew I wasn't a liar. He'd never known me to make up stories, not even as a kid. He didn't say he believed me, but he didn't say he didn't. He just nodded slowly and said, "The woods are old. There are things in them we don't understand." That was it. That was all there ever was to it. No grand explanation, no proof. Just a memory of a cold stream, a moonlit clearing, and three figures that shouldn't exist. One of them running toward the moon, forever frozen in my mind. I never went back to that part of the mountains again. I sold that Ford truck the following spring. Story 7. It was a Friday night, I think. No, wait, it was a Saturday, because we'd spent the day in Anchorage helping my friend move some stuff out of his old apartment. He'd borrowed his dad's truck for the trip, a beat-up Ford F-150 with those crappy halogen headlights that never stayed aligned right. You know how it is with older vehicles. The beams point too low or too high, and you're constantly squinting into the dark. Anyway, we were heading back to Fairbanks, where we both live, and it was already late, like past 11 o'clock. The sun sets early this time of year, so it was pitch black out. The kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face without some artificial light. The drive from Anchorage to Fairbanks is long, about 6 hours if you don't stop, and most of it is through these empty stretches of highway with nothing but trees and mountains. We were on the Parks Highway, cruising along near Denali Park, not right in the tourist area, but close enough that you see the signs for it. I was driving because my friend had been up since early that morning and was dozing off in the passenger seat. The radio was playing some staticky classic rock station, but I had it low because the hum of the engine and the wind noise were enough to keep me focused. I remember feeling pretty alert, though. I'd had a coffee back in Anchorage, and the cold air seeping in through the window crack was keeping me awake. The road was mostly deserted. Maybe 1 or 2 cars passed us, going the other way in the last hour. It's that kind of lonely drive where you start noticing every little thing, like the way the pine trees look like black spikes against the sky, or how the moon was just a sliver, giving off barely any light. My friend's truck lights were acting up again, like they always do, so I was leaning forward a bit, trying to see better ahead. The beams were aimed too low, I think, because they only lit up about 50 feet of road in front of me, and beyond that, it was just darkness. Then it happened. I was coming around a gentle curve, nothing sharp, and my lights hit something right in the middle of the road, sitting on the yellow line. At first, my brain didn't register what it was. It was just a dark shape, and I thought maybe it was a piece of debris or a big rock. But as I got closer, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, I could see it more clearly, and my heart just dropped into my stomach. It was a creature, I guess you'd call it, but it looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was sitting in a curled-up position, legs pulled up to its chest, arms wrapped around its knees, and its head was down, like it was resting or hiding its face. The posture was so human-like, but the size and the hair, God, the hair was long and shaggy, covering its whole body, and it was this reddish-brown color, like rust or dried blood. My first thought was, is that an orangutan? I mean, I've seen pictures of them, and that's what it reminded me of. Those apes that sit all hunched over, but that made no sense. We're in Alaska, for Christ's sake. There are no orangutans here, no monkeys at all. The only big animals around are bears, moose, maybe wolves. But this wasn't any of those. Bears don't sit like that, and they're not that reddish. Moose are tall and gangly, not compact like this thing. And it had knees, proper bent knees like a person, not the jointed legs of an animal. I was probably going about 50 miles an hour, and I didn't have time to swerve or brake hard without risking a crash. The road was narrow there, with steep drop-offs on either side, so I just gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept going, my eyes glued to it. As I got closer, maybe 10 feet away, I could see it in more detail because my lights were right on it. The hair wasn't smooth. It was matted and thick, like it had been out in the elements for a long time. The skin underneath wasn't visible, but the way the hair moved slightly in the wind. Wait, was there wind? I don't even remember, but I think it was still, like the air was holding its breath. The creature didn't move at all. It was just sitting there, frozen in that position. Then I was right next to it. I drove so close that if I'd been going slower, I could have reached out and touched it. The passenger side of the truck was maybe 3 or 4 feet away from it, and I was level with it because the road was flat there. I got a full view of its side profile. It was big, not huge like a bear, but maybe the size of a large man, but bulkier. The arms were muscular, covered in that reddish hair, and the hands, I think I saw hands, not paws, with fingers curled around its knees. The head was still down, so I couldn't see the face, but the hair on its head was longer, almost like a mane. The whole thing gave off this vibe of, I don't know, sadness or something, but also menace, like it didn't belong there, and it knew it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I think I stopped breathing for a second. I glanced over at my friend, who was still asleep, and for a split second, I thought about waking him, but I was too stunned. Then, as I passed it, I looked in the rearview mirror. The taillights of the truck lit it up from behind, and I saw it still sitting there, unmoving. But then, just for a moment, I thought I saw its head twitch, like it was starting to lift it, but I can't be sure because I was already speeding away. That's when I started freaking out. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I felt cold sweat on my back. I kept driving for another minute or two, my eyes darting to the mirrors, but I didn't see anything else. The road was empty behind me. I slowed down a bit, my mind racing. What the hell was that? Did I just imagine it? Maybe I was more tired than I thought. But no, it was too vivid. I could still picture it perfectly. The way the light caught the reddish hair, the shape of its body, it felt real, solid. I must have made a noise or something, because my friend stirred in his seat. He rubbed his eyes and mumbled, "What's up? Everything okay?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to brush it off, but I was too rattled. I took a deep breath and said, "Dude, I just saw something really weird back there." He sat up straighter, looking at me. "Like what? A moose?" I shook my head. "No, man. Something else. It was sitting in the middle of the road. Looked like, I don't know, like a big ape or something." He laughed a little, like I was joking, but then he saw my face. I must have been pale or something because he got serious. "Seriously? Where?" I pointed behind us. "Back there, on the yellow line. We just passed it." He turned to look out the back window, but it was dark, and we were already a good distance away. "Are you sure it wasn't a bear? Sometimes they sit weird." I shook my head again. "No, bears aren't that color, and they don't have that kind of hair. This was reddish, and it had knees like a person." I could hear the desperation in my own voice, and I was starting to doubt myself. Maybe I was losing it. But then my friend said something that made my blood run cold. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I think I saw it too. When I was half awake, I saw something out the window. I thought it was a log or something, but it had hair, reddish hair." My heart skipped a beat. "You saw it for real?" He nodded, his eyes wide. "Yeah, I did. I was about to say something, but I thought I was dreaming." That confirmation, it was both a relief and terrifying. Relief because I wasn't crazy, but terrifying because it meant it was real. We didn't talk much after that for a while. I kept driving, but now both of us were on edge, staring out into the darkness, expecting to see something else. The rest of the drive felt twice as long. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every tree stump seemed like it could be that thing. I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt, and my friend was fidgeting, looking around constantly. The atmosphere in the truck changed from tired and casual to tense and fearful. I remember the cold seeping in more, and I rolled up the window, but it didn't help. I felt exposed, like we were being watched. We didn't stop until we reached Healy, which is this small spot with a gas station and a few buildings, about 20 miles north of Denali. It was probably around 1 in the morning by then. I pulled into the gas station, and we both got out, stretching our legs but not saying anything at first. The place was quiet, with just one other car filling up, and the attendant inside the lit-up store. We went in to get some snacks and coffee, and that's when we started talking about it again, but quietly, like we were afraid someone would overhear and think we were nuts. Standing by the coffee machine, my friend whispered, "What do you think it was?" I shook my head. I have no idea, but it wasn't any animal I've ever seen. We both grew up in Alaska. We know the wildlife. Bears can be brown or black, but not that reddish tone. Moose are grayish or brown, but they're lanky and don't sit like that. Wolves are smaller and gray. This thing, it was different. It had a human-like shape but covered in hair, and it was just sitting there in the middle of the road like it was waiting or something. The more we talked, the more details came back. I remembered how the hair on its arms seemed coarse, almost like horsehair, and how it didn't react to the truck at all. No movement, no sound. That was eerie. Most animals would bolt or at least look up. We paid for our stuff and went back to the truck, but we didn't leave right away. We sat in the cab with the engine off, just talking in low voices. My friend said, "You know, I've heard stories about things like this, Bigfoot or whatever." I snorted. "Come on, that's just folklore." But then I thought about it. The descriptions online sometimes match, big, hairy, human-like. But I never believed in that stuff. Still, what else could it be? We racked our brains, but came up empty. No animal in Alaska has knees like that and reddish hair. None. We decided not to tell anyone else because, let's be honest, who would believe us? We're just two guys in their late 20s. Not exactly credible witnesses for something like this. We drove the rest of the way to Fairbanks in silence, both lost in our thoughts. I dropped him off at his place, and we just nodded at each other, like we had this shared secret that we couldn't explain. That was weeks ago, and I still think about it every day. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with some weird coloring, or a person in a costume. But no, it was too real, too vivid. The way it was sitting, the texture of the hair, the sheer strangeness of it all. I've driven that route a few times since then, always during the day, and I've never seen anything like it again. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I get this chill, like I'm being watched, and I remember that thing on the road, just sitting there, and I wonder what it was doing there, and why it didn't move. I'll probably never know, and that's the scariest part. Story 8. It was one of those days that started out perfect, you know, the kind where you're just glad to be outside, away from everything. A sunny, cool Saturday in November of 1976. I remember the air had that crisp bite to it, the kind that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter, but the sun was warm on your face. My cousin and I were out squirrel hunting in rural eastern North Carolina, not far from where I grew up. We were near this river that winds through a patch of hardwood forest and cypress trees, thick old growth that's been there forever. The leaves were mostly down, so you could see a good ways through the trees, but there were still enough patches of color to make it feel alive. We'd parked the truck off this dirt road and started walking in, maybe half a mile or so. Not too deep, but enough to feel isolated. The ground was soft underfoot, a mix of damp leaves and pine needles, and you could hear the river gurgling off to our left. It was peaceful. My cousin was a few steps ahead of me, his shotgun resting easy on his shoulder. We weren't talking much, just enjoying the quiet, scanning the branches for any sign of movement. Squirrels are tricky. They blend in so well you have to really focus. I was doing just that, my eyes tracing the outline of a big oak tree, when something caught my attention from the corner of my eye. It was a big, dark shape moving up from the river bottom. At first, I thought it might be a bear, We have black bears around here, but they're usually smaller and don't move like that. This thing was different. It was coming toward us, not fast, but steady, and it was huge. My whole body just locked up. I froze right there in the middle of the path, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't even breathe for a second. My cousin must not have noticed, because he bumped into me from behind, almost knocking me over. He muttered something like, "What the hell?" But I didn't answer. I just kept staring. The shape stopped about 35 feet away, right where the trees thin out near a small clearing. It was agitated, I could tell. Its shoulders were hunched, and it was making these low, grunting sounds that vibrated in my chest. I've never heard anything like it. Deep and guttural, like something you'd hear in a nightmare. That's when I got a clear look at it. This wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. It was covered in dark brown hair, longer on its head and arms, shorter on the rest of its body. The hair was matted in places, like it had been wading in the river. It stood 9 or 10 feet tall, easy, and it was built like a weightlifter, all muscle, broad shoulders, thick legs. I'd guess it weighed around 800 pounds, maybe more. It was just massive. But the worst part was its eyes. They were yellowish, bloodshot, and they seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the trees. They were fixed on us, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. It was like those eyes were looking right through me, into some part of me I didn't want exposed. Then it moved again, and that's when I saw its teeth. It opened its mouth in a kind of snarl, and I saw flat, human-like teeth, but with longer canines that made my skin crawl. It wasn't roaring or anything, just grunting. But the sound was enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. It reached out with one arm, and I swear, this is what still gives me chills, and grabbed a tree nearby. The tree was about 6 inches thick, solid oak, and it just snapped it like it was a twig. Not a slow crack, but a quick, sharp snap that echoed through the woods. The sound was so loud it made me jump. It felt like a warning, like it was telling us to get the hell out of there. And we got the message. I've never been so scared in my life. It was this overwhelming primal fear that made my legs feel like jelly. My cousin was breathing heavy beside me, and I could hear the panic in his voice when he whispered, "We need to go, now." We started backing away slowly, not wanting to turn our backs on it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Every step felt like it took forever. The ground was uneven, and I stumbled over a root, almost falling. That's when the thing took a step toward us, and that was it. We broke. We turned and ran like our lives depended on it. And maybe they did. I don't know. We ran through the woods, crashing through bushes, not caring about the noise. Branches slapped my face, and I could feel the burn in my lungs from sucking in cold air. We didn't stop until we'd covered about a quarter mile back near where we'd left the truck. When we finally slowed down, my cousin was hyperventilating, his hands shaking so bad he could barely hold his shotgun. He kept saying, "What was that? What the hell was that?" Over and over. We stood there for a few minutes, trying to catch our breath, both of us too scared to look back. The rational part of my brain kicked in eventually, and we started trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a bootlegger in a gorilla suit, someone playing a prank or trying to scare us off. That made a little sense. There were stories about moonshiners in those woods back in the day, but even as we said it, I knew it didn't fit. No suit could move like that. No person could snap a tree that thick with their bare hands. And the eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. We got back to the truck and drove home in silence. The whole way, I kept replaying it in my head. The way it moved. The sound of that tree breaking, the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. For years after, I'd wake up in a cold sweat dreaming about it. I've gone back to that spot a few times over the years just to stand there and remember. Nothing ever happened again, but the memory is still fresh, like it was yesterday. I can't explain it, and I don't try to anymore. Some things you just have to live with, and this is one of them. Story 9. That day, it was hot, the kind of humid, sticky heat that makes your t-shirt cling to your back. I'd been bored out of my mind just kicking around the house, and my mum finally shooed me outside. "Go find something to do," she'd said, "and stay out of the creek. Your good shoes are in the wash." So I wandered down the hill, through the patch of tall grass that always left little sticky seeds all over my socks. I remember the sound of the cicadas was so loud, it was like a constant buzzing pressure in my ears. It was the only sound, really. Even the birds were quiet in that heat. I wasn't supposed to go past the big fallen log that marked the edge of our property, but of course I did. I was a kid. Rules were more like suggestions. I climbed over it, the bark rough and crumbling under my palms, and headed for my favorite spot. It was a little elevated bank right next to the creek, a perfect place to sit and skip stones or just watch the water bugs skate across the surface. The ground was higher there, giving me a decent view back through the trees toward my house. I was just scuffing my feet through the leaf litter, looking for a good flat rock, when I saw it. At first, my brain just filed it away as part of the scenery. Over to my left, maybe 50 feet away, stood a cluster of trees. One was a tall, skinny pine, probably about 8 feet tall, and right beside it was what I thought was another tree trunk. Maybe an old, thick one that had been stripped of its bark, but something felt off. It was too straight, too uniform, and the color was wrong. It wasn't the gray-brown of dead wood. It was a brownish gray, like dirty fur. My eyes sort of slid past it and then snapped back. I stopped moving. I just stood there, my hand still hovering near the ground where I'd been about to pick up a rock. It wasn't a tree. It was a shape, a massive, upright shape. It was standing perfectly still, facing away from me, down towards the creek, and it was huge. I mean, it was standing right next to that 8-foot pine tree, and its shoulders were level with the top branches. My mind started stuttering, trying to find a box to put this in. A man in a coat, a bear. But bears don't stand like that, they just don't. This thing was standing on 2 legs, relaxed, like a person would stand. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, way wider than any man's I'd ever seen, and they tapered down to a narrower waist. It was just built. Thick and powerful looking, like a wrestler or something, but covered head to toe in this shaggy, brownish-grey hair. It was matted in places, almost like it had been wet and then dried. I remember my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a gasp. It was just... My lungs stopped working. I could feel my heart start to thump against my ribs. A hard, slow thud, thud, thud that felt too loud for the quiet woods. My eyes were glued to it. I could see the muscles in its back and shoulders bunching slightly under the hair. It was real. It was breathing. I must have made a sound. A tiny crunch of a leaf under my shifting foot, maybe. Or maybe it just sensed me. I don't know. But in that instant, its head began to turn. It wasn't a quick, jerky movement. It was slow, deliberate. Its head rotated over its shoulder, and for the first time I saw its profile. There was no distinct neck. Its head seemed to sit directly on those massive shoulders. I couldn't make out much of a face, just a dark, shadowy area where a face should be. But I had the overwhelming, gut-churning feeling that it was looking right at me, that it saw me. Time didn't slow down. It just became hyper-real. Every detail was burned into my brain, the way the sunlight dappled through the leaves onto its fur, making some strands look almost silver. The absolute profound silence of it. It hadn't made a single sound, not a grunt, not a breath, not a rustle. It was quieter than the woods around it. Then it moved. It turned its whole body towards me. It was even more massive from the front. The chest was deep, barrel-like, and that's when I looked down. Its feet, they were huge. I'm not talking about big feet like a tall person has. I'm talking about long, wide, almost paddle-shaped feet, much larger than any human foot, planted firmly in the soft earth. They were dark, almost black, and covered in the same hair, but sparser. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It just took a step, one slow, deliberate step in my direction, then another. It was walking towards me. Its gait was smooth, powerful, like it owned the ground it was walking on. It wasn't looking at the creek anymore. It was looking at me. That's when the fear hit me. It wasn't just being scared, it was a physical force. It was a cold wave that started in my stomach and shot out to my fingers and toes, turning them to ice. My mouth went completely dry. The buzzing of the cicadas, which had been this constant background noise, suddenly vanished. Or maybe I just couldn't hear it over the roaring in my own ears. All I could see was this thing, this impossible, silent giant, closing the distance between us. My body took over. My brain just shut off. I spun around so fast I almost fell over, and I ran. I didn't think about where I was going. I just ran in the opposite direction, away from the creek, away from it. I crashed through the underbrush, not following any path. Thorns and branches scraped at my arms and face, pulling at my t-shirt. I could feel stinging lines being drawn on my skin, but I didn't care. I didn't feel it. All I felt was this primal, screaming need to get away. I remember the sound of my own gasping breaths, ragged and too loud, the crunch, crunch, crunch of my sneakers on the dead leaves and twigs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was too terrified that if I looked back it would be right there, that those huge feet would be stomping right behind me. I ran until my lungs were on fire and my legs felt like rubber. I finally stumbled, falling to my knees in a patch of ferns, my chest heaving. I crouched there for a minute, listening. Nothing, just my own panting and the slow return of the cicada's buzz. The woods were normal again. The terror was still there, a cold knot in my gut. But the immediate screaming panic had subsided enough for me to think. I had to look. I had to know. Slowly, shaking, I pushed myself up and turned around. I peered back through the trees, towards the creek bank. I squinted, my eyes scanning the spot where it had been. The tall pine tree was there. The other trees were there. The leaf litter was there. It was gone. There was no sign of it. No massive footprints from my vantage point. No broken branches to mark its passage. It had just vanished. 1 minute it was there, a solid physical thing that blotted out the world, and the next it was just air. The space where it had stood was empty. I didn't wait around. I got up and started walking, then jogging back towards the fallen log and the safety of my yard. My heart was still hammering. Every rustle of a squirrel, every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that brownish-grey shape moving between the trees, silent and relentless. I burst out of the tree line into our backyard, the bright sun feeling alien after the dim woods. My mom was on the porch, watering her flowers. She looked over at me. "You're a mess," she said. "What have you been doing? And you're bleeding." I looked down at my arms. There were thin red scratches all over them from the brush I'd crashed through. I hadn't even felt them. I just shook my head and mumbled something about tripping. I went straight up to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, just staring at the wall. I could still see it. The way it stood, the way it turned, the sheer, overwhelming size of it. I didn't go back to that spot for a long, long time, weeks, maybe months. When I finally did, creeping down the hill like I was walking on eggshells, everything looked normal. The creek was still muddy, the stones were still there for skipping, but it felt different. The woods felt watched. They felt like they had a secret, and I was the only one who knew it. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot before on TV or from other kids at school. They were just stories, campfire tales. But that day, it stopped being a story for me. I didn't believe in Bigfoot anymore. I knew. I had seen it. I had felt the terror it could inspire just by existing. It wasn't a monster from a movie. It was a real, living thing that was so much bigger and more powerful than me. And it was out there, in those woods. And the part that still gets me, the part that keeps me up sometimes, isn't even the fear. It's the silence, the way it moved without making a sound, the way it just disappeared. I can still close my eyes and see it standing there, a part of the forest, and then turning and seeing me. and then it was just gone. Story 10. All right, I'll just get right into it. My name's Ricky Roberts, and this happened about 3 years ago in late October. I remember because the leaves were just starting to turn, but it had been a warm fall, so everything was still mostly green, just with these little flashes of yellow and red poking through. I had these two friends visiting from Dallas, Mark and his wife, Chloe. They're city people through and through. Tall buildings, constant noise, Uber Eats, the whole deal. They'd been wanting to get out into real Texas for a weekend, and since I've lived in this area my whole life, I volunteered to show them around. The plan for that Saturday was simple. We'd go for a drive down Highway 71, hit a couple of the scenic overlooks, and I was going to show them the old train trestles. It's this area I've always found kind of fascinating, not just for the scenery, but for the stories. I figured it'd be a fun, spooky little thing to talk about since Halloween was coming up. We got a late start. It was already past 3 in the afternoon by the time we piled into my truck. The sun was still pretty high, but it had that late afternoon slant to it, casting long, deep shadows across the road. I remember the air coming through the open windows was cool, but not cold, smelling like pine and damp earth. I was driving, with Mark in the passenger seat and Chloe in the back. We were just chatting, listening to some classic rock station that was fading in and out. I was pointing out landmarks, old farms, places where stuff used to be. It was all very casual. As we got closer to the Sulphur River area, the woods got thicker, pressing in on both sides of the highway. That's when I brought up the trestles. "So up here a ways," I said, nodding ahead, "there are these old railroad trestles. They don't use them anymore. But this whole area, it's got a bit of a reputation." Chloe leaned forward from the back seat, interested. "What kind of reputation?" "Oh, you know," I said, keeping it light. "Eyewitness stuff. People claiming they've seen things out here. Strange things in the woods." Mark chuckled. "Like what? Ghost trains?" "Nah, not trains," I said. I slowed down a little as we approached the stretch of road that runs parallel to the old rail line. More like figures, big dark shapes moving through the trees. That kind of thing. My dad always said it was just drunk hunters or kids messing around, but you hear stories. I pulled the truck off onto a wide gravel shoulder just east of the main columns of the trestles. The columns themselves are massive, made of old weathered concrete, covered in graffiti and rust stains from decades of rain. They loom over the woods, maybe 60, 70 feet tall. We got out of the truck, the gravel crunching under our boots. The sound seemed really loud in the quiet. The woods were dense here, a real tangle of pine, oak, and underbrush. From where we were standing, you could see the columns rising up, and then the forest just swallowing everything else. The air was still, no birds, no insects, nothing. I remember thinking it was odd for that time of day. I was pointing towards the columns, telling them about how trains used to cross here back in the day when I saw it. It was just a flicker of movement at first, deep in the trees, maybe 150 yards away, east of the columns. My eyes snapped to it. It was a dark shape, darker than the shadows around it. It was standing, just standing there among the trees. "Whoa, check that out," I said, my voice dropping without me even meaning it to. Mark and Chloe followed my gaze. "Check what out?" Mark asked, squinting. "I don't see anything." "Right there," I said, pointing more specifically. "In the trees, a dark figure. It took them a second, but then they saw it too." Chloe let out a little "oh." It wasn't a gasp of terror, more like a noise of surprise. We all just stood there for a second, staring. My first thought, the logical one, was a bear. We have black bears in East Texas. They're not super common, but they're around. But something about the way it was standing felt off. It was too upright. A bear on its hind legs is still kinda hunched, top-heavy. This thing was vertical, solid, and it was tall, really tall. The trees around it were big, and this thing was just a shade shorter than the lower branches. "Is that a bear?" Mark whispered. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. Then it moved. It didn't lope or amble like a bear. It didn't drop to all fours. It turned. It was a smooth, fluid motion, like it was pivoting at the waist, and it took one long, deliberate step behind a thick cluster of pines. The movement was so efficient. There was no wasted energy. It wasn't startled. It was just changing its position. My stomach did a little flip. That wasn't a bear. A bear doesn't move like that. A person doesn't move like that either, not with that kind of silent, powerful grace. It was like watching a shadow detach itself from one tree and merge with another. Did you see that? Chloe's voice was tight now. Yeah, I said. My mouth felt dry. A weird feeling started to creep over me, a mix of curiosity and a deep, primal unease. The stories I'd heard, the ones I'd just been casually mentioning, suddenly didn't feel so casual. They felt like warnings. Let's get a closer look, I heard myself say. I don't know why I said it. It was probably the dumbest idea I'd had all year, but the curiosity was like an itch I had to scratch. I had to know what I'd just seen. Mark looked at me like I was insane. Are you kidding? What if it's a bear? That wasn't a bear, I said, and I started walking towards the tree line. I wasn't running, just walking with a purpose. My eyes locked on the spot where it had disappeared. After a moment's hesitation, I heard their footsteps following me. We were a group. There was safety in numbers, right? That's what I told myself. Crossing the ditch from the gravel shoulder to the edge of the woods was like stepping into another world. The temperature dropped a good 10 degrees instantly. The light changed too, becoming a muted greenish gloom filtered through the canopy. The silence was even more profound. Our footsteps on the damp leaf litter sounded like explosions. We didn't talk. We just moved forward single file with me in the lead. I was hyper-aware of everything. The rough bark of a tree I brushed past, the way a thorny vine caught on my jeans. The smell in here was stronger. Rotting leaves, wet mud, and something else. Something musky and wild that I couldn't place. It was a heavy smell, like wet fur and old meat. My heart was thumping in my chest, a steady, hard rhythm. This wasn't fun anymore. This was stupid. Every few steps I'd stop and just listen, straining my ears. Nothing, just the faint rustle of leaves from our own movement. It took us maybe 5 minutes to get to the general area where we'd seen the figure. The columns of the trestle were much closer now, towering over us, blocking out a big chunk of the sky. We were in a small, relatively clear patch, surrounded by thick undergrowth. It was gone. Of course, it was gone. But the feeling wasn't. If anything, it was worse. The air felt thick, charged. It was the feeling you get when you know you're being watched, not just a casual glance, but studied. My skin was crawling. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck were standing straight up. "Where'd it go?" Mark whispered, his voice cracking a little. I just shook my head, scanning the trees. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, but everything was just still. Dark shapes. Then I looked down. The ground where we were standing was a mess of leaves and mud, but right at the edge of the clearing, near the base of a big pine tree, the leaves were disturbed. There was a clear impression in the soft earth. It was a footprint, but it wasn't a bear print. Bears have 5 toes with claws. This was different. It was long, maybe 18 inches from heel to toe and really wide. It looked almost human-shaped, but it was all wrong. It was too big for one, and the shape was off. The arch was in a weird place, and the toes, if they were toes, they seemed too long, and they didn't splay out like human toes. They were just these long, indistinct depressions at the front of the print. I felt a cold knot tighten in my gut. I pointed at it, and Mark and Chloe came closer to look. Chloe made a small, choked sound and put her hand over her mouth. We didn't say anything. We just stared at that print. It was proof. Proof that we hadn't just seen a trick of the light. Something had been standing right here, right where we were standing now. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a loud sound, It was low, so low I felt it more than I heard it, a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It vibrated up through the soles of my boots. It wasn't a growl, not really. It was more like a vocalization, a hum that was way too bass-heavy to be natural. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, and then it stopped. The three of us froze. We looked at each other, our eyes wide. We'd all heard it. The look on their faces mirrored the pure, undiluted fear I felt coiling in my own chest. That was it. The curiosity was gone, completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, animal need to get out of there. "We need to go," I said, and my voice was barely a whisper. Now, we didn't run. Running through that thick underbrush would have been a disaster. We moved as fast as we possibly could, stumbling over roots, pushing branches out of the way, not caring about the noise anymore. All I could think about was the truck. The truck was safety. The truck was the modern world. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark figure standing behind us or moving parallel to us through the trees. I saw nothing, just the silent, watching woods. Breaking out of the tree line and into the open air of the roadside felt like coming up for water after being held under. I was gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. We scrambled across the ditch and practically fell against the side of my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. We piled in, and I locked the doors with a loud, solid thunk. I started the engine, the sound unnaturally loud. I didn't even bother to put on my seatbelt. I just threw the truck in drive and peeled out, spraying gravel behind us. We drove in silence for a good 10 minutes, just putting distance between us and that place. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a dark shape loping after us down the highway. There was nothing, just the empty road and the deepening shadows. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice shaky. "What the hell was that, Ricky?" "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. I truly had no idea. We started talking then, all of us at once, our words tumbling over each other. We compared what we'd seen, the height, the way it moved, the footprint, the sound. We all agreed on the details. It was real. We hadn't imagined it. Chloe was crying quietly in the back seat. Mark was just staring out the window, his face pale. I had a death grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The terror of that moment, the sight of that shadowy form just watching us before it vanished, it settled deep inside me. It wasn't the fear of being attacked. It never made a move towards us. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of realizing that there are things in those deep, dark woods that we don't understand, things that watch us from the shadows with a quiet, ancient intelligence. The feeling that we were the visitors, the intruders in its world. We never went back. Mark and Chloe cut their trip short and drove back to Dallas the next morning. We still talk about it sometimes, but only in broad daylight, in a crowded room. It's been 3 years, and not a single day has gone by where I haven't thought about it, about that dark, vertical shape standing silently in the trees, and the way it just disappeared. I can still smell that musky odor, and I can still feel that low, vibrating hum in my bones. I don't have an explanation. I don't think I ever will. Story 11. It was one of those perfect September mornings on Mount Spokane, the kind that makes you remember why you put up with Washington's rainy seasons. The air was cool and clean, but the sun was warm on my jacket. My buddy and I were up there for bow season, hoping to get an elk. We'd been at it since before sunrise, working our way up through the timber off one of the old logging roads, not too far from the ski lifts. You could just see the top of the building for Gussie's restaurant way down below us, a little speck in the distance. We'd parked the truck down near the main road and hiked in, wanting to get away from the easy access areas. The plan was to get high, find a good vantage point, and just wait. That's how you hunt with a bow. You don't chase, you outsmart. We found a decent spot on a south-facing slope, a mix of tall pines and some open patches where the sun hit the ground. We were sitting with our backs against a couple of big firs, just watching a clearing a few hundred yards below us. It was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get deep in the woods. Just the sound of a light breeze in the tops of the trees and the occasional scuffle of a squirrel. I remember the feeling of the bow in my hands. It's a Matthews, and I know every scratch on the cam, every little worn spot on the grip. I had an arrow nocked, just resting there, my release aid clipped onto the loop. My friend was to my left, maybe 10 feet away, doing the same. We weren't talking. We hadn't spoken for over an hour. You get into this zone, this hyper-aware state where you're just part of the landscape. You notice everything. The way a shadow shifts, the way a bird stops chirping. It must have been around 10 in the morning. The sun was well up, casting long, sharp shadows from the west. I was scanning the tree line across from us, my eyes moving slowly from left to right, when I saw something on the ridge above the clearing. Not in the trees, but on the very crest of the ridge, silhouetted against the bright sky. The sun was directly behind it, so it was just this solid black shape, no details, just a cutout. My first thought was, that's a weird-looking tree stump. But there weren't any stumps up there. It was just rock and low brush on the ridgetop, and then it moved. It didn't step out. It was just there. And then it was moving. It was upright, on two legs. There was no question about that. The way it moved was what caught my breath in my throat. It was fast, unnaturally fast. I'm not talking about a guy jogging. I'm talking about a blur of motion. It was booking along the top of that ridge like it was running on a track. I made this little grunt sound, a sharp exhale to get my friend's attention. I didn't dare look away or point. I just kept my eyes locked on it and hissed his name. He saw it a second later. I heard his sharp intake of breath. We both have hunting scopes on our bows. I ripped mine up to my eye, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. The scope magnifies things, but with the sun behind it, it was still just a black shape. But now I could see the proportions. This thing was massive. I've seen tall guys. I'm 6 feet even. My friend is 6'2". This thing made us look like children. It had to be at least a foot, maybe 2 feet taller than the tallest man I've ever seen. And it wasn't just tall, it was wide. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and it had a powerful, thick torso that tapered down. It didn't look lanky. It looked solid, heavy, and it was moving along the ridge, covering ground at a speed that just didn't make sense for something that size. It was running on 2 legs, its arms pumping, but the gait was fluid, powerful. It wasn't a clumsy run. It was efficient, like a predator. My mind was racing, trying to categorize it. Bear? No. Bears don't run upright like that. Not for that distance, not that fast. A person in a ghillie suit? Impossible. No person is that big, and no person can run like that, especially not over uneven rocky terrain on a mountain ridge. The ridge itself was maybe 1,000 yards away from us, but it felt like it was right on top of us because of how huge this thing was. We watched, frozen, as it sprinted along the crest. It was heading for the tree line at the far end of the ridge. I started trying to do the math in my head, the calculations you learn as a hunter for judging distance and speed. The ridge it was on was long. From where we first saw it to the tree line it was aiming for had to be the length of several football fields put together. 5,000 yards is about 3 miles, and I'm telling you, that's not an exaggeration. It covered that open ground in what felt like a minute, maybe less. I'm trying to think of how to describe the speed. An elk, a big bull, can hit 30-40 miles an hour in a full sprint. This thing was moving at that pace. But an elk is on 4 legs, low to the ground, built for it. This thing was a skyscraper on 2 legs, just eating up the distance. Its legs were moving in these huge, loping strides, each step covering an impossible amount of ground. It was a mechanical, terrifying efficiency. The terror wasn't instant. It started as confusion, then disbelief. Then it curdled into this cold, heavy dread that settled in my gut. My mouth went dry. I could feel my palms sweating inside my gloves. I was gripping my bow so tight my knuckles ached. This was the moment, the exact second it clicked for both of us. We weren't looking at an animal we knew. We weren't looking at a misidentified bear or a trick of the light. We were looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist. It was a Sasquatch. There was no other word for it, no other explanation. The thought just landed in my brain, fully formed and ice cold. I didn't say it. My friend didn't say it. We didn't have to. I could feel the same realization coming from him, a wave of pure, undiluted fear that passed between us without a single word. We watched it until it hit the tree line. It didn't slow down. It just vanished into the dark shadows of the pines and firs, that huge, black, impossibly fast shape just swallowed by the forest. Gone. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was a thick, pressing silence. The normal wood sounds were still gone. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I slowly lowered my bow, my arms feeling weak and shaky. I looked over at my friend. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He just stared at the empty tree line, his bow hanging loosely in his hand. We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat there listening. My heart was still pounding, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I felt cold all over despite the sun. The warmth had been sucked right out of the day. Every little sound, a twig snapping, the wind rustling a bush, made me jump. My nerves were completely shot. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 minutes, my friend finally turned his head toward me. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "We need to go." I just nodded. There was no discussion. The hunt was over, ruined. The idea of still being out here, of trying to sneak up on an elk, was laughable. We were the ones being watched now. That feeling was overwhelming. This thing, whatever it was, knew this mountain better than we ever would. It had just demonstrated that. We stood up, our movements slow and stiff. We didn't pack up quietly. We just grabbed our packs and started walking. We didn't even bother trying to be stealthy. We just wanted to get back to the truck. The hike out was the most terrifying experience of my life. Every shadow felt like a hiding place. Every time we entered a thicket, my skin crawled. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the ridges above us, expecting to see that silhouette again. My friend was doing the same thing. We were walking fast, almost at a jog, our boots crunching loudly on the forest floor. I've never felt so exposed, so completely out of my element. I'm a hunter. I'm supposed to be the one in control out here. I know how to track, how to read sign, how to be quiet. In that moment, I felt like a noisy, clumsy child blundering through a place where I didn't belong. We were just two guys with expensive toys, and we had just seen the real master of this territory. The relief I felt when we broke out of the trees and saw the truck was physical. It was like a weight lifted off my chest. We practically threw our gear in the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. My friend started the engine, and we just sat there for a minute, not saying anything, just breathing. He finally put the truck in drive, and we got out of there, bouncing down the dirt road way faster than we should have. We didn't talk much on the drive back. What was there to say? We both saw it. We both knew what it was. Saying it out loud wouldn't have made it more real. It would have just made it more terrifying. That was a few years ago now. We haven't been back to Spokane County to hunt since. We tried once, the next season. We drove up, got our gear ready, and then just sat in the truck at the trailhead for 20 minutes. We looked at each other, and without a word, he turned the truck around, and we went home. The unsettled feeling never went away. It's like that encounter left a permanent mark on us. It ruined the woods for me, at least the deep woods. I still go out, but I stick to more populated areas, places where I can hear other people. I think about it all the time. Not every day, but often. Usually at night when it's quiet, I'll see that silhouette against the sky, that impossibly fast, powerful movement. I'll remember the way the dread felt, cold and solid in my stomach. I'll remember the absolute certainty that we were in the presence of something we were never meant to see. People can believe me or not. It doesn't really matter. I know what I saw. My friend knows what he saw. We were two experienced hunters, two guys who know the difference between a bear and a man and a tree stump. We saw something that day on Mount Spokane that defied every explanation we had. We saw something that moved like the wind and stood like a giant, and it looked right back at us from 1,000 yards away, even if we couldn't see its eyes, and then it was gone, leaving us with a fear that never really left. Story 12. Hey everyone, I'm Richard Taylor, and I've been sitting on this for a while now trying to figure out how to put it into words. I've always been into the outdoors, you know, hunting, camping, that kind of thing. But this was something else. It happened last fall. During a Native American drum-making workshop I signed up for near Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma. I'd heard rumors about Bigfoot sightings in the area, and I'll admit, part of me was hoping to catch a glimpse. I never expected what actually went down. The workshop was on this remote property owned by a mixed-blood Cherokee woman. I won't use her name here out of respect. She's been living out there for years, knows the land like the back of her hand. The whole thing was supposed to be about connecting with tradition, making drums from hides and wood, and sharing stories around the fire. For the first couple of days, it was pretty normal. We'd work on the drums during the day, and at night, we'd sit by the fire, listening to her talk about Cherokee legends. She never outright said Bigfoot was real, but she hinted at things, you know? Like how the woods hold secrets that most people aren't ready for. I'd brought some gear with me, a night vision scope, a small camera, even a handgun for protection, though I kept it hidden. I know some people might think that's overkill, but out in the middle of nowhere, you never know. The property was dense with woods, thick pines and oaks that blocked out most of the sunlight even during the day. At night, it was pitch black, the kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face without a light. I'd been sneaking out after everyone was asleep, scanning the trees with my scope, but I hadn't seen anything, just shadows and the occasional owl hoot. I was starting to think it was all in my head. Then, on the last day of the workshop, everything changed. We'd just finished up a fireside gathering around dusk. The air was cool, with that damp, earthy smell you get after a light rain. The fire crackled, and the landowner was telling a story about spirits in the forest. I remember feeling antsy, like I needed to be out there in the woods. As people started heading back to their tents, she caught my eye and motioned for me to stay. She didn't say much, just that she could tell I was searching for something. And if I wanted, she'd show me a place where things sometimes happened. My heart was already pounding a little, part excitement, part nerves. I grabbed my backpack with the night vision scope and the gun, and we set off into the woods. No flashlight, just the moon peeking through the clouds. It was one of those nights where the moon casts these silvery ribbons of light through the trees, enough to see outlines but not details. The ground was soft underfoot, covered in pine needles, and every step made a faint crunch. I could hear the usual night sounds: crickets, frogs from a nearby creek, the wind rustling leaves. But as we went deeper, it got quieter, like the forest was holding its breath. We walked for what felt like half an hour, though it was probably less. The landowner moved silently, almost gliding through the trees. I was trying to keep up, my boots squelching in mud here and there. Then we came into a clearing, a small, open space surrounded by tall trees. The moon was brighter here, illuminating the grass and a few scattered rocks. She stopped and pointed ahead. "This is where you might see what you're looking for," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I pulled out my night vision scope. It was a decent one, not top of the line, but it had worked fine until then. I flicked it on, and for a second, everything lit up in that greenish glow. I could see the trees, the shadows, Nothing out of the ordinary. Then, without warning, the scope just died. No flicker, no low battery warning. It just went black. I tapped it, shook it, but nothing. My stomach dropped. I'd checked the batteries before we left. They were fresh. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. That's when I heard it. Heavy footfalls, like something big was moving through the trees nearby. Not just one, but multiple. Thud, 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 slow and deliberate, like whatever it was, it wasn't in a hurry. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The landowner put a hand on my arm, her grip firm. "Don't move," she said softly. I could feel her trembling. Or maybe it was me. The footfalls were getting closer, circling us. I couldn't see anything beyond a few feet, but I could sense them. Large shapes moving in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I started to feel that primal fear, the kind that makes you want to run or hide. I reached for my gun, my hand shaking as I undid the holster. I didn't pull it out, just rested my hand on it, like a stupid comfort. Then, the weirdest thing happened. A voice popped into my head. Not like hearing someone speak, but clear as day, like a thought that wasn't mine. It said, "Why do you carry a gun?" No accent, no emotion, just those words. I gasped aloud, my whole body going cold. I looked at the landowner, but she was staring into the trees, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, but she just shook her head slowly. The voice came again, same tone. "Step away from it." I was terrified, my mind racing. Was I losing it? But it felt so real, so immediate. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to take a step back, away from where I'd been standing. I let go of the gun, letting my hand fall to my side. The footfall stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, in one of those moonlit ribbons, I saw it, a massive figure swaying in the trail ahead. It had to be at least 10 feet tall, broad-shouldered, covered in dark hair that gleamed in the faint light. It moved slowly, almost rhythmically, like it was dancing or something. My breath hitched. I couldn't look away. As my eyes adjusted, I saw more shapes behind it. Smaller ones, juveniles, I guess, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall, moving cautiously. And then, a tiny one, no bigger than a human toddler, stumbled into view. It was curious, looking right at me with these dark, intelligent eyes. It took a step toward me, and my heart just about stopped. I wanted to back away, but I was rooted to the spot. The landowner whispered, "Don't make any sudden moves." I could feel her fear mingling with mine, a thick, heavy air between us. The big one, the alpha, I suppose, swayed again, and I heard a low hum, almost like a chant, but no sound came from its mouth. It was like the telepathy again, but this time it wasn't words, just a feeling of calm, like it was telling me it was okay. The toddler Bigfoot came closer, within arm's reach, and I could smell it, a musky, earthy scent, like wet fur and soil. It reached out a hand, fingers long and knobby, and for a second I thought it was going to touch me. But then the alpha made a soft grunt, and the little one backed off, disappearing into the shadows. We stood there for what felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. The landowner slowly started backing up, pulling me with her. I followed, my legs weak, my eyes locked on the alpha. As we reached the edge of the clearing, it let out this resonant call, not a roar, but like an owl hoot, deep and vibrating through my chest. Then, just like that, they were gone. The footfalls faded, and the forest sounds returned, like nothing had happened. We hurried back to the property, neither of us speaking. My mind was reeling. I'd gone out there thinking Bigfoot was some elusive animal, but what I saw, it was a family, a tribe. They weren't monsters, they were beings with kids, with communication I couldn't explain. When we got back, the landowner just looked at me and said, "Now you know." I packed up my things and left that night, driving home in a daze. I've never told anyone this until now. I still don't know what to make of it. The fear was real, but so was the awe. It changed me, made me see the world differently. Sometimes when I'm out in the woods, I think I hear that owl call and my skin prickles. I don't have any answers, just this memory that haunts me. Thanks for listening. Story 13. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never written it down before, never told anyone the whole thing. My wife knows something happened that day because I came back white as a sheet and sold all my hunting gear by the end of that winter, but she doesn't know the details. I don't think anyone would believe the details, but since this is a place for these kinds of things, I guess I'll put it here. Maybe it'll get it out of my head. It was the second day of deer season. I'm almost certain it was 1986, but it could have been 87. Those years blend together after a while. I was in my late 20s, thought I was invincible, you know? I'd been hunting these same woods in Pennsylvania since I was a kid with my dad. I knew them like the back of my hand. That's why I went deep into this particular ravine. It was a bitch to get into, which meant most guys wouldn't bother. More chance for a big buck if you're willing to work for it. The walk in that morning was normal. Cold, crisp. There was about a foot of snow on the ground from a storm a couple days before. It was perfect tracking weather. I found my spot, a little natural blind where I could lean against a big old hemlock and see down into the bottom of the ravine. I settled in before sunrise, just like always. The morning was quiet, but a normal quiet. You hear things in the woods, squirrels chattering, the crunch of a deer stepping on a frozen branch somewhere. I saw a few does, let them pass. I was waiting for a buck. But as the day went on, things started to feel different. It was after lunch. I'd say maybe 2:30. I was eating a peanut butter sandwich my wife had packed, and I realized I hadn't heard a single gunshot in over an hour. Now, on the second day of deer season, in good tracking snow, it's not right. The woods should be popping with shots every few minutes. This was a dead silence. Not even the birds were making noise. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a blanket pressing down on everything. I remember feeling a little uneasy, but I shrugged it off. Maybe the weather was changing, I thought. Maybe a front was moving in, and the animals were hunkering down. But the feeling just got worse. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was a dread. That's the only word for it. A cold, sinking feeling in my gut that told me something was very, very wrong. I'd been scared before, surprised by a bear once. That got the heart going. But this was different. This was a deep, primal fear. The kind that whispers in the back of your brain that you're not the hunter anymore. You're the prey. My hands were getting cold, but this was a cold that came from the inside. I remember my breath pluming in the air and thinking it looked too loud, too visible. Then I heard the sounds. At first, I thought it was other hunters. It sounded like voices, men talking. They were up the hill from me, to the east. I felt a flicker of relief. Other people. Good. But the relief lasted about 2 seconds. The voices were wrong. They weren't shouting or laughing like hunters do. They were chattering. It was fast and it sounded like a language, but not any language I'd ever heard. The best way I can describe it is like if you took an Asian language, like Japanese or something you'd hear in a war movie, and played it backwards, really fast. It was distorted, guttural. There were no words I could understand, just this rapid-fire, clicking, gurgling speech. And they were moving. Fast. Unbelievably fast. I could hear the sound of the voices moving through the trees, up the hill, and I could hear the snow crunching underfoot. But the speed, it was impossible. I'm not exaggerating. It sounded like they were running at highway speed, 40, 50 miles an hour, through a foot of snow, through thick timber. You ever try to run through deep snow? You're lucky to do 5 miles an hour. This was like a train, a chattering, guttural train rushing through the woods. The sound went from my left to my right in maybe 10 seconds, covering a distance that would take a man on foot a good 15 to 20 minutes. My heart was just hammering against my ribs. I pressed myself back against the hemlock, trying to make myself small. My rifle was in my hands, but it felt like a toy. What was I going to shoot at? A sound? The voices faded away up the ridge, and for a minute there was that heavy silence again. But the dread was worse now. It was a physical weight on my chest. Then the crashing started. It came from the same direction, from the top of the ridge where the voices had gone. It wasn't the sound of a deer or an elk. This was loud, violent. It was the sound of big branches, thick as my arm, just snapping, not falling under the weight of snow, breaking, like something huge was just plowing through the trees, not going around them. I swung my head, trying to see, but the trees were too thick. I was looking up the hill, and all I could see was the trunks and the white snow. And then I saw the pine tree. It was a lone white pine, maybe 60, 70 feet tall, standing a little apart from the others, and it started to sway. Not a gentle sway in the wind. There was no wind. This was like someone had grabbed the top of it and was shaking it back and forth. The whole trunk was whipping, the branches thrashing, and snow was just exploding off it, falling in great white clouds. It was moving with a force like a hurricane. I've never seen a tree move like that without a tornado touching down, and that's when I saw the figure. It was standing right under that thrashing pine tree. My eyes were just drawn to the movement, and then they focused on what was causing it. My brain didn't want to process it at first. It was tall. So damn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least 7 feet, maybe more. It was just standing there, and the top of this massive pine tree was whipping around right above its head. It was covered in hair, not black like in the movies. It was a medium brown color like wet bark, and it was long and shaggy. And right on its upper chest, or maybe its shoulder, there was a patch that was lighter, a tan or dirty yellow color. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was just a dark shape under the hair. But I got the impression of a heavy brow. I was frozen. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I just stared, my jaw probably hanging open. The thing was just standing there, and the tree was going crazy above it. It felt like a long time, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then it stepped forward. It took one step and its arm came down. I saw that arm so clearly. It was long, way too long for a human, and powerfully built. The hair on its arm was matted. It swung its arm down in a casual, powerful motion, like it was brushing a branch aside, but there was no branch there. It was just a movement. And then it walked behind a cluster of 3 or 4 medium-sized spruce trees. I held my breath. My eyes were locked on the gap between those trees. The spacing was narrow, maybe a foot or 2 between each trunk. A man would have had to turn sideways to squeeze through. I waited for it to come out the other side. I was expecting to see a leg, an arm, something. Nothing. The tree above had stopped thrashing. The woods were dead silent again. The figure was just gone. It didn't come out the other side. It didn't make a sound. It had just vanished. That was the moment. That was the peak of the terror. The dread that had been building in me just exploded. My brain was screaming. It went behind the trees. It has to be there. It can't just disappear. But it did. There was no sound of footsteps. No more breaking branches. Nothing. I don't know how long I stood there staring at those spruce trees, waiting for something to happen. My fingers were numb around the stock of my rifle. My whole body was shaking, a fine, constant tremor that I couldn't control. The feeling of doom was so strong it was like a taste in my mouth, metallic and sour. I felt like if I moved, if I made a single sound, it would know exactly where I was. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I could not go up there. I could not investigate. The thought of walking over to those trees, of looking behind them, of seeing its tracks, it was unthinkable. It felt like a trap, like it was waiting for me to do just that. Slowly, so slowly, I started to back away. I didn't turn my back on that cluster of trees. I kept my eyes glued to them, my rifle, useless as it felt, pointed in that general direction. I backed down the ravine, step by careful step, my heart pounding in my ears. Every crunch of my boot in the snow sounded like a gunshot. I expected that thing to come bursting out from behind any tree at any second. It took me forever to get out of that ravine. I'd back up 20 feet, stop and listen, then back up some more. The woods were still dead silent. The normal sounds of the forest were just gone. It was like everything living had fled or was hiding, just like me. When I finally broke out of the thick timber and onto the old logging road I'd come in on, I turned and I ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just ran. I ran until my lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. I didn't stop until I got to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just shaking. I had to use both hands to get the key in the ignition. I drove home too fast, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, checking the rearview mirror the whole time, half expecting to see a tall brown figure loping after me down the road. I never went back to that ravine. I went hunting a few more times that season, but I stuck to the edges, to places where I could see other hunters' orange coats. I was jumpy the whole time. Every little noise made me flinch. The joy was just gone. The peace I used to find in the woods had been replaced by that cold dread. By the spring, I'd sold my rifle, my gear, all of it. For years, I didn't talk about it. I tried to convince myself it was a bear, a big, weird bear. But bears don't make trees whip around like that. Bears don't run 50 miles an hour through deep snow. Bears don't have voices that sound like backwards Japanese. And bears don't just vanish into thin air. It wasn't until maybe 10 years ago, when I stumbled onto a book about strange creatures, that I read other accounts, people talking about the silence that falls, the wood knocks, the whoops and calls. And then I read about some guys out west who described the exact same thing I heard. That distorted, backwards-sounding language, they called it samurai chatter. That's when it really hit me. I hadn't just seen something. I'd heard it too, and other people had heard the same damn thing. I never got a clear look at its face. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw and what I heard. I know the terror I felt, a terror that's still right there under the surface, even now, all these years later. I know that something was in those woods with me that day, something that shouldn't exist, and it knew I was there. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me up some nights, is that I have no idea what it wanted or why it just disappeared. I just know that it did, and that I've never felt truly alone in the woods since. Story 14. It was one of those Colorado afternoons that starts out completely normal and ends with your whole worldview shattered. I must have been 13, maybe 14, that age where you're too old to be scared of the dark, but still young enough that your parents leaving you alone feels like a huge deal. My mum and dad had driven down to Colorado Springs for some anniversary dinner, leaving me with my friend. Let's just call him Mike. That's not his real name, but it feels weird writing this all out without one. We were planted on the living room floor, glued to some dumb movie on TV. The kind of thing you don't really watch, you just have on for noise. The house was this older place, kinda isolated at the end of a long dirt driveway, surrounded by pine trees. You could see the front yard from the big picture window, and the front door had this smaller square window at the top, about eye level for an adult. I was half watching the screen, half thinking about what snacks we were going to raid next, when Mike went completely still. I mean statue still. I nudged him with my elbow, thinking he'd fallen asleep or something, but his eyes were wide open, locked on the front door. "Dude," he whispered. His voice was tight, strained. "Don't move." I rolled my eyes. "What? Did a squirrel get on the porch again? We had a problem with them getting into the bird feeder." "No," he said, not looking away from the door. "There's something looking in the window." I laughed. It was a nervous, stupid laugh. "Yeah, right. My dad's messing with us. He does that." My dad had a weird sense of humor. "It's not your dad," Mike said, and the tone of his voice shut me up completely. It was pure, undiluted fear. I'd never heard him sound like that. He was a tough kid, played football, wasn't scared of anything. so I turned my head. I looked at the little square window in the door, and I saw it. It was a head, but it was all wrong. It was round like a ball, but bigger, and it was too high up, way too high. The top of its head was brushing against the top of the window frame. That window was high enough that I, at 5'0", had to stand on my toes to see out of it clearly. For something to be looking in through it, its eyes would have to be, I don't know, 7.5, 8 feet off the ground. The shape was dark, silhouetted against the fading afternoon light, but I could see it was covered in something dark, and it was just still, just looking in. My brain short-circuited. It tried to file it under bear or moose or weird neighbor on stilts, but nothing fit. The proportions were off. The stillness was wrong. A bear would shuffle, a moose would move its head. This thing was frozen just like Mike had been, but its gaze felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing through the glass. Then the panic hit. It wasn't a slow build. It was a tidal wave. 1 second I was confused. The next, my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my ribs. I couldn't breathe. We didn't say a word to each other. We just scrambled up from the floor so fast we knocked over a bowl of popcorn. "My mom's room," I gasped, and we both bolted down the hall. My parents' bedroom was at the back of the house. It felt safer, farther away. The door had a lock, a flimsy little button in the doorknob, but I slammed the door shut and twisted it anyway. The click was pathetically small. My mum kept a .22 rifle in her closet. It was for varmints, coyotes mostly. I'd been taught how to use it, how to load it, how to be safe with it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the box of bullets open. The little cartridges were slippery with my sweat. I fumbled them into the magazine, my fingers feeling thick and stupid. The sound of the bolt clicking into place was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. "Did you lock the front door?" I whispered to Mike. We were both breathing in ragged, shallow pants. He shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. "I'm not going back out there." So we were trapped in this bedroom, with an unlocked door between us and whatever was on the porch. The TV was still blaring from the living room, some cheery commercial now, a horrible, jarring contrast to the sheer terror we were feeling. That's when we heard it. First, it was breathing, a heavy, wet, rhythmic sound like a big dog but deeper, slower. It was right outside the house. We couldn't tell which window. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Who? Shh. Shh. We pressed ourselves against the wall, trying to be small, to be quiet. I had the rifle gripped so tight my knuckles were white. The cold metal of the stock was pressed against my cheek. Then the scratching started. It wasn't like a dog scratching to get in. It was slower, more deliberate, a long, dragging sound, like something with thick claws was being dragged slowly down the outside wall of the house. It went on for what felt like forever, stopping, then starting again somewhere else. On the wood siding, it sounded like nails on a chalkboard, but deeper, more resonant. We were crying. I'm not ashamed to admit it. We were just kids, and we were sobbing silently, tears and snot running down our faces. The fear was a cold lump in my stomach. I thought I was going to be sick. The scratching moved around to my parents' window. This window was even higher off the ground than the front door one, because the house was on a slight foundation. You'd need a tall ladder to look in. The heavy breathing got louder, right outside the glass. The curtain was closed, a thick, floral patterned thing, but we could see the shape of something massive blotting out the light from outside. The room got darker, then it pressed its hand against the screen. I will see that image until the day I die. The window screen was a mesh wire, and this hand covered a huge portion of it. It was bigger than a dinner plate. It was covered in thick, coarse black hair, like a really shaggy dog. But the hair was wiry. Through the gaps in the fur and the mesh, I could see the skin beneath was a dark, leathery, grayish black. The fingers were long, too long, and I remember seeing what looked like dirt or mud caked under where the nails would be. They weren't claws like a bear, but they were thick and blunt. The sheer size of it is what froze the blood in my veins. That window was a good 8 feet off the ground. For something to be standing outside and press its hand flat against a window that high, it had to be impossibly tall. 10 feet. More. My brain couldn't even process it. It just held its hand there, and the breathing got heavier, louder. The whole screen bowed inward slightly from the pressure. Mike snapped. I saw it in his eyes. The pure terror was replaced by a wild, survival instinct rage. He ripped the rifle out of my hands. I was too stunned to stop him. He didn't aim. He didn't even shoulder the weapon properly. He just pointed it in the general direction of the window and pulled the trigger. The bang was deafening in the small room. The glass of the window exploded outward with a sickening crunch. He worked the bolt and fired again. Another deafening crack. For a second there was silence, a ringing, absolute silence, except for the TV still chattering away down the hall. Then we heard it. A sound I can only describe as a roar, but not like a lion or a bear. It was lower, guttural, a sound of pure fury and pain that seemed to vibrate right through the walls. It was followed by the sound of something huge crashing away through the brush, snapping branches and trampling bushes. The sound moved fast, heading away from the house, down towards the dense tree line. And then it was gone. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was heavy, pregnant with what had just happened. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, sharp and acrid. Tiny shards of glass littered the carpet and the bedspread. The cold night air started pouring in through the 2 bullet holes in the now shattered window. We didn't move for a long time. We just stood there, shaking, listening. The world outside was quiet. No more breathing, no more scratching. Somehow I managed to stumble to the phone in my mom's room. My fingers were so numb, I misdialed 3 times before I got 911. I was crying so hard I could barely get the words out to the dispatcher. There's something outside. We shot at it. Please send someone. The sheriff's deputy who showed up was a big, calm guy. He took our statements, his face unreadable. We were both hysterical, talking over each other, pointing at the window. He went outside with a big flashlight. He was out there for a long time. When he came back in, he looked puzzled. "You boys sure you saw something?" he asked, not unkindly. We both started yelling again. Its hand! It was on the screen! It was huge! He led us to the front door. He shone his light on the screen door. And there it was, a perfect, massive handprint pressed into the dust and grime of the metal screen. It was larger than any human hand could possibly be. The fingers were long. The palm was broad. You could see the pattern of the coarse hair imprinted in the dust around the edges. He looked at it for a long time, then shook his head. "I'll be damned," he muttered. He took us outside to show us what he'd found, or, more accurately, what he hadn't found. The ground around our house was hard-packed clay, dry from a lack of rain. He showed us the 2 bullet holes in the outer wall, right where Mike had fired. But there were no tracks. No footprints, nothing. It was like whatever had been there had just vanished. My parents got home an hour or so later. They found 2 sheriff's cars in the driveway, their son and his friend wrapped in blankets on the couch, and a broken bedroom window. The look on their faces shifted from confusion to concern to something else when the deputy quietly showed my dad the handprint on the screen. My dad was a big man, over 6 feet tall. He put his own hand up next to the print. His hand was completely dwarfed. The print was a good 4 inches longer and twice as wide. They never found anything. No animal, no tracks, no explanation. The deputy filed his report. And that was that. My dad replaced the window and the screen the next day, but the memory wasn't so easy to fix. We never talked about it much after that. What was there to say? We knew what we saw. We knew what we heard. We knew the size of that hand. I'm a grown man now. but I still get a cold chill down my spine if I'm outside at night and I hear a branch snap. I look at windows differently, always checking the height, wondering what could possibly be tall enough to look in. It's the handprint I can't get past. The physical proof. That thing was real. It was out there. And sometimes, in the quiet of a Colorado night, I lie awake and wonder if it's still out there, and if it remembers the 2 kids who shot at it, and what it would do if it ever found us again. Story 15. It was a Thursday, I think, because I remember I'd just gotten home from work around 6 and was feeling pretty tired. I spent the evening just lounging around, watching some reality TV in the living room. The sun had gone down maybe an hour or 2 earlier, so it was fully dark outside, probably around 9 o'clock. I had all the lights off except for the TV glow, and the house was dead silent except for the show I had on. I was just zoning out, not really paying attention, when I heard this noise from the front yard. At first it was just a heavy thud, like something big had bumped into the garbage can. We keep our cans out by the driveway about 20 feet from the front door, and they're those big plastic ones with lids. I figured it was probably a bear. We get them sometimes, especially if there's food scraps in the trash. They're usually not aggressive, but they can make a mess, so I thought I'd better check before it got worse. I muted the TV and listened for a second. There was more noise, this kind of scraping sound, like the can was being dragged or shifted around. It was louder than what a raccoon would make, and heavier, so I was leaning toward it being a bear. I got up from the couch slowly, not wanting to startle whatever it was, and tiptoed over to the front window. The blinds were closed, but I carefully pushed one of the slats aside with my finger, just enough to peek out. The porch light wasn't on. I usually don't leave it on unless I'm expecting company, so it was pretty dark. But there's a street light down the road that casts a faint glow, enough to see shapes and movement. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a bear. It was this huge, towering figure standing right by the garbage can. I mean, this thing was massive, so tall that the garbage can, which is about 3 feet high, only came up to its mid-thigh. It was covered in long, shaggy, dark hair, almost black, and it was bent at the waist, leaning over the can. One of its hands was inside, sifting through the trash, and the lid was on the ground nearby. Its arms were incredibly long, dangling down, and I could see how powerful its build was, broad shoulders, thick limbs, like a bodybuilder, but on a much larger scale. It moved with this slow, deliberate motion, like it was searching for something specific. I froze. I mean, completely froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to make a sound, didn't want it to know I was watching. I just stood there, glued to the spot, my fingers still holding the blind slat open a crack. I could feel the cool air from the window on my face, but I was sweating, a cold sweat that made my shirt stick to my back. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Was it a person in a costume? No. The height was all wrong. This thing had to be 7 or 8 feet tall, easy, and the way it moved. It was too fluid, too natural for a costume. It wasn't jerky or awkward. It was like it belonged there. I watched for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a minute or 2. The figure kept digging through the trash, occasionally pulling out something and dropping it back in. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was too dark, and the hair covered most of it. But I got the impression of a heavy, rounded head, not like a human's. Its hands were what really got me. They were huge, with fingers that looked almost human, but thicker, and it was using them to pick through the garbage like a person would. That's when I knew it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. Bears have paws, raccoons have little hands, but this was different. This was something with hands that could grip and sift. My legs were starting to shake, and I knew I had to move. I slowly let the blind slat fall back into place, making sure not to make any noise. I took a step back from the window, my heart still hammering. I could hear it outside, the sound of the garbage can shifting again, a low grunt or rustle. but no other sounds, no cars, no wind, just this thing messing with my trash. I backed away until I was in the middle of the room. Then I just stood there listening. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call someone, but who? The police? And say what? That there's a big hairy thing in my yard? They'd think I was crazy. Plus, I was too scared to make a noise, even to talk. After a few more minutes, I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, thudding steps, like someone walking with purpose, but slower than a human would. They started moving away from the house, toward the woods at the edge of my property. I held my breath, listening as they faded into the distance. Once I couldn't hear them anymore, I stayed put for a long time, maybe half an hour, just standing in the dark, waiting to see if it would come back. My whole body was tense, every muscle tight, and I could feel this knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Eventually, I forced myself to sit down on the couch, but I didn't turn the TV back on. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the window, expecting to see something at any moment. Every little noise made me jump, the creak of the house settling, the hum of the refrigerator, even my own breathing sounded too loud. I kept replaying what I saw in my head over and over, the height, the hair, the way it moved. It was so unreal, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I'd seen it clear as day, even in the dim light. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just stayed on the couch, occasionally getting up to peek through the blinds again, but I never saw anything. The yard was empty, quiet. I must have checked a dozen times, each time my heart racing, afraid I'd see it staring back at me, but nothing. The hours dragged on, and I just felt this deep, gnawing fear that wouldn't let up. I kept thinking about what it could be. Bigfoot, that's what people would say, but I'd always thought of that as a myth, something from stories. Now, I wasn't so sure. When the sun finally started to come up, around 6 in the morning, I felt a little relief, but I was still on edge. I waited until it was fully light outside before I even thought about going out. I unlocked the front door slowly, my hand shaking, and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and fresh, but I could still smell this faint, musky odor near the garbage can, like wet dog or something, but stronger. I walked over to where the can was, and my stomach dropped. The can was on its side, and the garbage bag was ripped wide open. Trash was scattered everywhere. Old food wrappers, banana peels, coffee grounds, all strewn across the grass. But what really got me was that there were no tracks. The ground was dry and hard from lack of rain, so there should have been footprints if it was an animal or a person. But there was nothing, no paw prints, no shoe prints, nothing, just the mess. I stood there for a minute, just looking at it all. My mind was racing again. If it was a bear, there'd be tracks. A raccoon would have left little handprints. But this was clean. The only sign was the ripped bag and the scattered trash. And the way it was torn, it wasn't chewed or clawed. It was ripped, like something had pulled it apart with hands. That confirmed it for me. Whatever it was, it had hands, and it was big enough to handle a garbage can, like it was nothing. I cleaned up the mess as fast as I could, my eyes darting toward the woods every few seconds. I kept expecting to see movement, but it was just quiet. After I was done, I went back inside and locked the door, and I just sat at the kitchen table, feeling exhausted, but too wired to sleep. I kept thinking about what I'd seen, and the fear settled into this low-level anxiety that's been with me ever since. I never saw it again, and that was months ago, but I'm still on edge, especially at night. I don't go outside after dark anymore if I can help it. And when I take out the trash, I do it during the day and hurry back in. Sometimes when I hear noises outside, my heart starts racing and I have to talk myself down. I've told a couple of people about it, but most just shrug it off or make jokes. I don't blame them. I probably would too if I hadn't seen it myself, but I did see it, and I can't forget it. That image is burned into my brain. The towering figure, the dark hair, the way it moved. I don't know what it was, and I don't think I ever will. It's just one of those things that happened, And now I'm left with this lingering fear that someday it might come back, and that's the part that keeps me up at night. Story 16. It was June of 1988. I was 17. That's all you really need to know about me. Just a kid, you know? I had my whole life supposedly ahead of me, but that night, something got ahead of me in a way I still can't shake. It's been years, but I still don't sleep right. I still get jumpy around tall trees, and the smell of swamp mud can send me right back there. That night, I was driving home from my friend's house out past Bishopville. We'd just been hanging out, listening to tapes, the usual stupid stuff you do when you're 17 and it's summer and you have a car. My dad's old Chevy pickup. It was a beat-up thing, but it ran okay. I was cutting through the roads by Scape Swamp. It's the quickest way home, but nobody really likes driving it late. It's just dark. The kind of dark that feels heavy. The trees sort of close in over the road, and even with your high beams on, you can't see much past the ditch. It was 2 in the morning. I remember because I'd just looked at the clock on the dash, thinking I was going to catch hell from my mum for being out so late on a weeknight. The radio was playing some classic rock station, but it was starting to get staticky, like it always does out there. I was just driving, not thinking about much, just the road and the hum of the tires. Then there was this sound, a loud thump, thump, thump from the back, and the truck started pulling hard to the right. I knew right away I had a flat. A real bad one. I cursed and pulled over onto the shoulder, which wasn't much of a shoulder at all, just gravel and weeds sloping down into a ditch filled with black water. I sat there for a second with the engine running, just listening. The only sound was the tick-tick-tick of the engine cooling and the swamp noises. Crickets, frogs, all that. It was loud. I turned off the radio to hear better, and that's when the reality of the situation sunk in. I was 17, alone, on a deserted road next to Scape Swamp at 2 in the morning with a flat tire. My heart was already beating a little fast. I'm not gonna lie, that place gives you the creeps, even on a good day. At night, it's a whole different thing. It feels ancient. It feels like you don't belong there. I knew I had to change the tire. I couldn't just sit there, so I took a deep breath, said a little prayer. Not that I was real religious, but you know, in situations like that, and got out. The air hit me first. It was thick and warm and smelled like rotting plants and stagnant water, the kind of smell that sticks in the back of your throat. I went around to the bed of the truck to get the jack and the spare. The light from the open door only reached so far, and beyond that it was just pitch black. I could feel eyes on me. I know that sounds crazy, but you know that feeling. When the hair on your arms stands up for no reason. I had that. Bad. I kept telling myself it was just a deer or a raccoon, anything normal. Getting the lug nuts off was a fight. They were rusted on good. I was sweating. My hands were slipping, and every little sound in the woods made me freeze and stare out into the darkness. I remember the feeling of the rough, cool metal of the lug wrench in my palms, the grunt I let out when one of the nuts finally broke loose. It took me maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like an hour. The whole time my neck was prickling. I was just waiting for something to happen. Finally, I got the flat off and the spare on. I was tightening the last lug nut, my back aching, my shirt soaked with sweat when I heard it. It wasn't an animal sound, it was different. It was a heavy, rhythmic thumping sound, like someone hitting the ground hard with both feet, and it was getting closer, fast. I dropped the lug wrench. It clattered on the pavement and I scrambled up, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. I looked down the road, back the way I came, and that's when I saw it. Coming out of the darkness, right down the middle of the road, was this thing. It was tall. So damn tall. 7 feet at least. It was running on 2 legs, but it wasn't running like a man. It was loping, powerful, its arms pumping, and its eyes. Oh God, its eyes. They were glowing, a bright fiery red, like 2 hot coals stuck in its face. I didn't think. There was no thought. It was just pure, raw terror. A cold wave washed over me and my legs just moved. I threw myself towards the driver's side door. My hands were shaking so bad I fumbled with the handle. I could hear the thumping getting louder, closer. It was covering ground so fast, I finally yanked the door open and fell into the seat. I slammed the door shut and hit the lock button. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. I turned the key. The engine coughed and then roared to life. I didn't even look. I just threw it into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel for a second before catching, and the truck lurched forward. I was so focused on the road ahead, on getting away, that I didn't look to my side. I just heard a deafening crack as my window exploded inward. Glass showered all over me, tiny sharp pieces stinging my face and arms. And then its arm was in the cab. It was long and covered in dark matted hair that looked almost black in the dim light. And its hand. It had 3 fingers, 3 long, thick fingers, and each one ended in a long, curved black nail, like a bear's claw, but sharper. It was grabbing for me, swiping at my face. I screamed. I don't even know what sound came out of my mouth. It was just a noise of pure, undiluted fear. I swerved the truck, trying to shake it off, but it was strong, unbelievably strong. I could smell it then, a smell I will never, ever forget. It was like a combination of rotten meat, wet dog, and something else. Something foul and musky, like a skunk, but 1,000 times worse. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. It was roaring, this deep, guttural sound that wasn't human and wasn't animal. It was a sound of rage. I ducked as its claws swiped past my head, and I felt the wind of it. I was still pressing the gas, but the truck wasn't going that fast. I glanced at the speedometer. I was only doing 35 miles per hour. 35! It felt like I was standing still. Then there was this tremendous bang on the roof. The whole cab shook. It had jumped onto the roof. The metal groaned and buckled right above my head. I could hear it moving up there, scraping, pounding. I was looking up, terrified the roof was just going to cave in on me. That's when I saw the marks on the windshield. Right at the top, where the glass meets the roof, 2 sets of 3 long, deep scratches appeared, scraping down the glass. They were from its fingernails, those long black claws digging in for a hold. The sound was horrible, a high-pitched screeching that set my teeth on edge. I was sobbing now, just begging, "Please, God, please, just let me get away." I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I started swerving again, back and forth, trying to throw it off. I drove in an S pattern down the middle of the road. I didn't care if I crashed, I just had to get it off. There was another roar from the roof, and then a heavy thud behind the truck. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw it. I saw it get up from the road. It just stood up, those red eyes burning right at me, and let out this final ear-splitting scream that felt like it vibrated right through the truck. Then it turned and loped off the road, disappearing into the blackness of the swamp in 2 strides. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I just drove. I drove with the wind whipping through the broken window, my face cut and bleeding, the smell of that thing still filling the cab. I was shaking so hard I could barely keep the truck on the road. I kept checking the rear view, expecting to see those red eyes coming after me again, but there was nothing, just empty, dark road. The rest of the drive home is a blur. I don't remember the turns or the streets. I just remember finally pulling into our driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires. The kitchen light was on. My mom always left it on for me. I stumbled out of the truck and ran for the house. I burst through the back door, and my parents were sitting at the kitchen table. They took one look at me, covered in glass, bleeding, pale as a ghost and shaking like a leaf, and they jumped up. "Chris, my God, what happened? Were you in an accident?" my mom cried, rushing over to me. I just collapsed into a chair. I couldn't get the words out at first. I was just gasping. My dad put a hand on my shoulder. "Son, what is it?" I finally looked up at them, my eyes wide. There was something on the road, by the swamp. My mom brought me a glass of water, but my hands were shaking too much to hold it. My dad had to steady it for me. I took a sip and tried to explain. The words tumbled out, all jumbled. It was tall, I said, my voice trembling. Like 7 feet tall. It was covered in hair, and its eyes, they were red, glowing red. It chased me. It broke the window. It had 3 fingers, Dad. 3 fingers with long black nails. It jumped on the roof. I saw the scratches. I was getting hysterical. My dad looked at my mom, and I saw that look, that the boy's in shock look. But then he went outside to look at the truck. He came back in a few minutes later, and his face was different. It was serious, pale. He looked at me and then at my mom. The driver's side window is gone, shattered, and there are deep scratches on the roof and on the windshield, long ones like claw marks. That's when they believed me, but believing me didn't change what happened. It didn't make it any less real. We never reported it to the police. What would we have said? They would have thought I was crazy or on drugs. We just never talked about it much after that. I got the window fixed. My dad tried to buff out the scratches on the roof, but you could still see them if you looked closely. I never drove by Scape or Swamp again at night. I still don't. I take the long way around, even now, because I know what I saw. I know what was out there, and sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind is blowing through the trees, I can still smell that foul, rotten smell, and I just know, it's still out there. Story 17. It was still dark that morning, the 24th of February, 2009. I know the date because it's burned into my head. Same as the time, about 20 to 6 in the morning. I was in Huntsville, Alabama for a work thing, some conference about network infrastructure that was due to start later that day. I was staying at one of those chain hotels, right near the Space and Rocket Center. You know the one. It's got the big rockets out front you can see from the highway. My room was on the 6th floor. I hadn't slept well. I never do in hotels. The air is always too dry, and the pillows are never right. I'd been lying awake for maybe an hour, just staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the ice machine down the hall. Finally, I just gave up. I swung my legs out of bed, the carpet feeling kind of gritty under my bare feet, and I decided to step out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. Maybe it would clear my head, help me shake off that groggy, half-awake feeling. I slid the glass door open. It made that low rumbling sound aluminum frames make. The air outside was cold, a real sharp chill that went right through my t-shirt and pajama pants. I remember gripping the cold metal railing with both hands and just breathing in. It was quiet, not completely silent, but that kind of low hum of a city that's still mostly asleep. A few cars way off in the distance on the highway, the sound of a plane high overhead. I was looking out over this wooded area behind the hotel. It wasn't deep wilderness or anything, just a decent-sized patch of trees separating the hotel property from some other buildings. Maybe an office park or something. There was a thin, early morning mist hanging in the air, the kind that makes everything look a little soft and unreal. My eyes were just kind of drifting over the tree line, not really focusing on anything when something moved. It wasn't a deer. I've seen plenty of deer. This was different. It was big, and it was upright. My brain sort of stuttered, trying to make sense of the shape. It was standing near a big pine tree, one of the taller ones. I squinted, my heart starting to thump a little harder in my chest. The light was bad, that weird pre-dawn gray, but there was enough of it to see the thing was tall. I'm talking 6.5, maybe 7 feet tall. And it was covered in this fine, shaggy hair. It looked gray in that light, a dirty, matted gray. But its face wasn't hairy. The skin on its face was dark, a deep, leathery brown like old walnut. And it was looking right at me. I froze. I mean, my whole body just locked up. My fingers were still curled around the cold railing, and I couldn't have let go if I tried. It was about 120 yards away, maybe a little less. A football field. That's what I kept thinking. It's a football field away. It was far, but not so far that I couldn't make out details. The sheer size of it, the width of its shoulders. It was massively built, like a powerlifter, but lean. Then it started rocking. Just a slow, steady rocking motion, back and forth on its feet. It did this for what felt like a long time, probably 10 or 12 seconds. The movement was hypnotic and deeply, deeply wrong. It wasn't a nervous fidget. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like it was, I don't know, like it was thinking or waiting. Its eyes never left me. I could feel its gaze, even from that distance. It was an intense, intelligent stare. This wasn't the blank look of an animal. This was something that was seeing me, registering me, thinking about me. Then it stopped rocking. It turned its head slightly, looking at the big pine tree it was standing next to. It raised its right arm, and I say arm because it wasn't a paw or a limb. It was an arm with a hand, and it hooked its fingers into the bark of the tree. Then it pulled. It wasn't a violent rip. It was a sawing motion, back and forth, like a man using a draw knife. I could hear it. The sound carried in the quiet morning air, a low, tearing, gritty sound, like ripping thick cardboard. Rip, rip. It peeled a long strip of bark away from the tree, just like that. It held the strip in its hand for a second, then dropped it to the ground. Then it turned its head back and stared at me again. My mind was screaming. Every instinct was telling me to run, to get back inside, to lock the door. But I was paralyzed. I just stood there, watching this thing, alternate between staring a hole through me and calmly, methodically stripping bark from a tree. It would look at me for a minute, then turn and pull another strip, the muscles in its arm and back bunching under that gray hair. I could see the power in its movements. It wasn't straining. It was easy for it. The bark came away like it was nothing. I don't know how long I stood there. It must have been 5 or 6 minutes. The whole time, my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. My mouth was dry as dust. The cold from the railing was seeping into my hands, but I couldn't feel it anymore. All I could feel was this primal electric fear. This was real. This was happening. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't hallucinating. There was a 7-foot-tall creature with gray hair and a dark face tearing bark off a tree and watching me from 120 yards away. I finally managed to break the spell. I stumbled back into the room, my legs feeling like rubber. I fumbled for the phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking so bad I misdialed the front desk twice. A guy answered, sounding bored. I was trying to talk, but my voice was a shaky, breathy mess. I think I said something like, "There's something in the woods, outside my room. You need to see this." He must have heard the pure terror in my voice, because he didn't argue. He just said, "Room number?" I told him, and he said he'd meet me downstairs in 2 minutes. I pulled on a pair of jeans and shoes, not even bothering with socks. I kept peeking out through the balcony curtains. The thing was still there. It was just standing now, completely still, facing my direction. I ran out of the room, down the hall, and took the elevator down. The security guy was waiting in the lobby. He was a big guy, maybe in his 50s, with a tired face and a uniform that was a little too tight. He had a big flashlight in his hand. "You the guy from 612? He asked. I just nodded, unable to form words. "All right, show me." We went out a side door and started walking across the damp grass towards the tree line. The sun was starting to come up now, casting a weak pinkish light. The mist was beginning to burn off. With every step, my fear grew. What if it was still there? What if it was aggressive? This security guard had a flashlight, not a gun. We were completely exposed. We got to the edge of the woods, right about where I'd calculated the thing had been standing. The security guy was shining his flashlight around, looking skeptical. "I don't see anything, man." "Look at the tree," I said, my voice still tight. "The big pine. He swung the beam of light onto the trunk of the pine tree I'd been looking at from my balcony, and there it was, fresh, raw wood. A whole section of the trunk from about chest high on me up to well over my head was stripped clean. Long, ragged strips of bark were scattered on the ground around the base of the tree. The wood underneath was pale yellow, wet-looking, and smelled strongly of sap. The security guy whistled low. Damn, a bear'll do that sometimes. It wasn't a bear, I said, and my voice had a little more force now. It was standing up, on 2 feet. He just grunted, not convinced. He poked at one of the bark strips with his boot. Then I saw something else, a few feet away, a pile of droppings. Scat. It was huge, much bigger than any dog or coyote scat I'd ever seen. It was full of what looked like berry seeds and bits of undigested something, hair maybe. The security guy saw it too, and his expression changed. He looked from the scat to the stripped tree, then back at me. You're serious, aren't you? I'm telling you what I saw, I said. I walked over to the tree. I wanted to prove it. I wanted to show him that whatever did this was stronger than a man. I grabbed a piece of bark that was still attached to the trunk, just a small piece at the edge of the stripped area. I planted my feet, got a good grip, and pulled with all my strength. My muscles strained, my face got hot. The bark didn't budge. Not even a little. It was like trying to pull a piece of metal off a car. I finally let go, my fingers aching, my breath coming in gasps. The security guy was just watching me, his flashlight beam on my hands. You okay? I shook my head. I can't even move it. That thing, it was just peeling it off, like it was nothing. That's when he shone his flashlight down at the ground, at the bed of brown pine needles around the tree. Hey, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Look at this. We both knelt down. The pine straw was thick, but pressed into it, clear as day, were footprints. They were enormous, long, wider than my hand, with 5 distinct toes. They were deep, too, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. We followed the trail with our eyes. They led from the tree, back into the deeper, darker part of the woods, and they just stopped. The pine straw gave way to harder, rocky ground, and the trail vanished. We stood there for a few minutes, not saying anything. The security guy kept shining his light into the woods, but there was nothing to see now, just trees and shadows. The sun was properly up now. The world was turning a normal daytime color, but the normal world felt like a lie. The air was still cold, but I was sweating. We walked back to the hotel in silence. He said he'd file a report, but he didn't know what to put in it. I went back up to my room. The first thing I did was go to the balcony. I stared out at that same pine tree. The raw, pale wood stood out like a wound against the dark bark. I could still see, in my mind's eye, that thing standing there. The slow, unnatural rocking, the dark, intelligent eyes locked on mine, the effortless, powerful tearing of the bark. I packed my bags and checked out. I told the front desk I had a family emergency. I drove the 5 hours home in a complete daze. I didn't go to the conference. I called in sick. That was years ago. I've never told this story to anyone who wasn't a close friend or my wife. People talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, like it's a joke. A guy in a suit, a story for around a campfire. It's not a joke. What I saw was real. It was physical. It left marks. It stripped bark I couldn't even budge. It left footprints. It left scat. It was there. The terror of that morning isn't something you forget. It's the feeling of being seen by something that isn't supposed to exist. It's the chilling certainty that came from its gaze, a look that was too knowing, too focused. It wasn't just an animal startled by a human. It was an intelligence. And for those 5 or 6 minutes, we were aware of each other. I was just a man on a balcony, and it was something else. Something that lives in the woods, on the edge of our cities, in the spaces we don't really look at, and sometimes it looks back. I still can't explain it. I just know what I saw. Story 18. I slipped out of bed, trying not to wake my daughter in the next room. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. I grabbed my pack of Marlboros and my lighter from the kitchen counter and headed for the back door. The handle was cold, and the door stuck for a second like it always does before swinging open with a low groan. Stepping outside was like walking into a wall of wet heat. This is Orlando in the summer, even at 2 in the morning. The air is thick, it's hard to breathe deep. The humidity clings to your skin the second you're out of the AC. The only light came from a single yellow bug light mounted on the corner of the house, throwing long, weird shadows across the backyard. It doesn't really light things up so much as it just makes the darkness look dirty. My backyard isn't huge. It's mostly just patchy St. Augustine grass that's always struggling, a few scrubby palmettos, and then it backs right up to a thick line of woods. Separating our property from the trees is this old chain-link fence, maybe 6 feet tall, all rusty and sagging in places. Beyond that fence, it's just pure Florida wilderness, oak trees draped in Spanish moss, dense brush, and who knows what else. You can hear things moving around out there at night, but it's usually just raccoons or possums, sometimes the distant yip of a coyote. You get used to it. I lit my cigarette, the flame of the lighter flaring up for a second and making me squint. I took a long drag, the smoke burning my lungs in a familiar, almost comforting way. I was just standing there, leaning against the side of the house, looking out at the dark tree line. My brain was starting to finally slow down, the nicotine doing its job. And then I heard it. It wasn't a small sound. It wasn't a raccoon rustling through leaves. This was a heavy, metallic, shaking sound. A violent rattling. The sound of a chain-link fence being grabbed and shaken against its top metal bar. My head snapped toward the noise, which came from the far right corner of the fence, about 50 feet away. At the same time, I heard a crunching, a snapping of branches and underbrush, like something big was stomping through it. My first stupid thought was, a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, they wander into suburbs, but this sounded different, more deliberate, and higher up. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. The yellow bug light didn't reach that far, so it was all shadows and shapes. But then I saw it, a leg. It was hanging down from the top of the fence. It was long, covered in what looked like dark, wet-looking hair. It wasn't a bear's leg. Bears have stout, powerful legs. This was lanky. It was thick like a tree trunk, but long, and the foot, I couldn't see it clearly, but it wasn't a paw. It was just a dark shape. My heart, which had been thumping along normally, just froze. For a full second, I think my heart actually stopped. Then it kick-started again, a frantic, painful hammering in my chest that felt like it was going to break my ribs. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, just staring at this leg hanging from my fence. My eyes traveled up, following the line of the leg, and that's when I saw its back. It was massive. It was turned away from me, one arm hooked over the top of the fence, preparing to pull itself over from the woods side into my yard. Its back was impossibly broad, covered in the same dark, matted hair. The muscles under that hair weren't like a man's muscles. They were like slabs, like the shoulders of a gorilla, but on a much, much bigger frame. The sheer size of it is what my brain kept getting stuck on. It was hunched, but even hunched, the top of its head was a good foot above the 6-foot fence. This thing had to be 8 feet tall if it stood up straight, maybe more. I was still holding my cigarette. The ash was getting long. I couldn't even feel it between my fingers. Then it turned its head. It wasn't a quick movement. It was slow, deliberate, like it had known I was there the whole time. Its head rotated over its shoulder, and its eyes locked directly onto mine. I will never, for as long as I live, forget those eyes. They weren't animal eyes, not like a dog's or a bear's. They weren't human eyes either. They were intelligent. They were a deep, dark brown, almost black, and they seemed to absorb the little bit of light from the bug light, not reflect it. There was a sharp awareness in them, a kind of ancient, cold curiosity, and in that split second I felt something I've never felt before, a primal, gut-level terror that told me I was looking at a predator, and I was prey. It wasn't just fear, it was a knowing, a certainty that this thing could end me without a second thought. The eye contact couldn't have lasted more than 2 seconds, but it felt like an hour. My blood went cold. My lungs forgot how to work. I was just a statue, a terrified statue, staring into the eyes of a monster in my own backyard. Then it moved. It was so fast it was a blur. It pulled that long leg back up and over the fence in one fluid, powerful motion. It didn't climb down. It used its arms, its incredible strength, to swing its whole body over the top bar of the fence. It didn't just drop into the brush on my side. It used the bar like a launch point, pushing off and vaulting itself deep into the thicket. The fence shuddered and vibrated from the force. The sound it made when it landed was a heavy, wet thump, followed by an explosion of cracking branches and crushed vegetation. The noise receded fast, heading away from my yard, deeper into the woods. In maybe 3 seconds, the sound was gone. The rattling fence settled. The night was silent again, except it wasn't silent. My ears were ringing from the adrenaline. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my head. I was still frozen solid, my cigarette now burned down to the filter, the heat finally searing my fingers. I yelped and dropped it, stamping it out on the concrete patio with a shaky foot. My entire body was trembling. My hands were shaking so bad I had to clasp them together. My knees felt like water. I couldn't process what I had just seen. My brain was screaming, "Bear!" It was a bear, a big bear. But I knew, with a sick, sinking certainty in my gut, that it wasn't. I'd seen bears. This was different. The proportions were wrong. The way it moved was wrong. The way it looked at me was so wrong. And then the smell hit me. It wafted over from the direction of the fence, a foul, heavy odor. It's hard to describe. It was like a mix of wet dog, but 1,000 times stronger, and something else. Something rotten, like old meat and swamp water. It was a physical smell. It coated the inside of my nose and the back of my throat. It was disgusting, and it made my stomach turn. I stood there for I don't know how long, maybe a minute, maybe 5, just shaking and staring at the spot where it had been. My rational mind was trying to claw its way back. A person in a suit? No. No way. The speed, the sheer power, the size. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything I had ever seen on a screen or in a book. This was real. This was flesh and blood and hair. And that horrible, intelligent stare. I had to tell someone. I had to have a witness. I felt like if I didn't, I would convince myself I'd imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. The image was burned into my retinas. I stumbled back inside, my legs barely working. The house felt alien. I rushed to my daughter's room. She's 13. She was asleep, her phone glowing on her chest. I shook her shoulder, probably harder than I meant to. "Wake up," I whispered, my voice hoarse and shaky. "You have to come outside, now." She groaned, disoriented. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Just come, please. Be quiet." She saw the look on my face, the sheer panic I'm sure was written all over it, and she didn't argue. She got out of bed and followed me, rubbing her eyes. I led her to the back door, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest. I cracked the door open. "Listen," I hissed, "and smell. Do you smell that?" We both stood in the doorway, peering out into the dark yard. The foul odor was still there, maybe a little fainter, but definitely there. It was unmistakable. She wrinkled her nose. "You, what is that? It smells awful." "Just listen," I said, my eyes glued to the tree line. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from deep within the woods, we heard it, a series of heavy, crunching steps. Not running, just walking. Slow, deliberate, powerful steps that vibrated faintly through the ground. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Then, a low sound. It wasn't a growl, not really. It was deeper than that. a kind of guttural rumbling hum, like the lowest note on a cello played by something with lungs the size of kegs. It was a sound I felt in my teeth more than I heard with my ears. My daughter grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Her eyes were wide, all sleepiness gone. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is that?" The sound stopped. The humming cut off. The woods went silent again. The only thing left was that terrible lingering smell. We stood there for another minute, just listening to nothing. Finally, I closed the door and locked it. I checked the deadbolt 3 times. We sat together on the couch in the living room, not talking, just listening. Every tiny creak of the house made us jump. I kept looking out the window, expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me from the other side of the glass. She eventually fell asleep on the couch, but I didn't sleep at all. I just sat there in the dark, running the whole thing over and over in my head. The rattling fence, the leg, the massive hairy back, the slow turn of its head, the eye contact, the intelligence in that gaze, the way it moved with such impossible speed and strength, the smell, the sounds my daughter heard. This wasn't the first time something had happened out by that fence. A few months back, I was taking the trash out late one night, and I felt something run past me on the other side of the fence. I didn't see anything, but the ground vibrated under my feet. I mean, it actually shook. And the sound, it was like a bulldozer plowing through the underbrush, tearing through palms and branches like they were nothing. It was so fast and so loud, and then it was just gone. I wrote it off then. A bear, I told myself. A really big, panicked bear. But now, after tonight, I know it wasn't a bear. It was the same thing. It had been here before. It was familiar with this area. Sitting there in the dark, the terror slowly morphed into something else, a deep, profound unsettledness. This thing, whatever it is, isn't just a random animal passing through. It knows this place. It knows my yard. It knows the fence. And tonight, it knows that I saw it. It knows that I know it's here. The sun is up now. The normal sounds of a Saturday morning are starting. Lawn mowers, kids playing, cars driving by. It all feels fake, like a painted backdrop. The world looks the same, but it's not. It can't be, because I know what's out there in those woods. I looked it in the eyes, and it looked back. And I have no idea what it is or what it wants, but the feeling I got from that look is something I can't shake. It wasn't just a look of surprise or aggression. It was a look of assessment, of recognition, and that's the part that scares me the most. Story 19. This was back in Saline County, Arkansas, the 1860s. I was a young man then, strong and stupid, thinking I knew the shape of the world. I worked with my hands, farming mostly, but I could handle myself and wasn't afraid of a hard day's work. That's why, I suppose, when the talk started in town, my name got mentioned. The talk was about something out in the deep woods, the places where the light gets thin and the trees grow close. The locals, families that had been there for generations, they were scared. Not the normal kind of scared of wolves or bears, but a quiet, deep-down fear. They talked in low voices at the general store about a wild man, a thing that was 7 feet tall if it was an inch, covered in thick, matted hair, something that walked on 2 legs but wasn't a man. It had been stealing livestock, not clean kills like a predator, but messy, frantic things. A pig half-eaten and left in the mud, a calf gone, just a trail of blood leading into the cane brakes, and the sounds. People who'd been out near the woods at dusk said they'd heard something that wasn't a wolf, wasn't a cat, a kind of hollering that made the hair on your neck stand straight up. It built for weeks, that fear. It gets into a community like a sickness. You start seeing things in the corner of your eye. Every snapped branch in the woods becomes a sign. The men in town, we finally decided we had to do something. It was a party of about 8 of us. We weren't soldiers or heroes, just men with rifles and a shared simmering dread. We figured we'd track it. maybe get a shot at it, put an end to the stories. The morning we set out, there was a heavy fog clinging to the ground, the kind that makes the world feel small and close. The air was cold and wet, and everything was quiet, the way it is before something bad happens. We found tracks after a couple of hours. They were like a man's footprints, but huge, and the stride was long, too long. The lead tracker, a quiet fellow named Elias who knew the land better than anyone, just pointed at them, and his face was grim. He didn't need to say anything. We all felt it then, the shift from hunting an animal to hunting something else. This wasn't a bear. We followed those tracks all day, deeper and deeper into territory that felt old, untouched. The woods got thicker, the cane brakes so dense you had to push through them, the leaves sharp like knives. The silence was the worst part. No birds, no squirrels, just the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of our boots. It was a waiting silence. The tracks led us to a cave, just a dark mouth in a rocky hillside, hidden behind a tangle of vines and fallen trees. The smell hit us first. It's a smell I'll never forget. It was like wet dog, but 100 times stronger, mixed with something rotten, something foul, like old meat and dirt. It was so thick you could almost taste it in the back of your throat. We stood there, just looking at that black hole, and I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was its den. We didn't have a plan, not really. We just knew we had to get it out. We started making noise, shouting, banging our rifles against the trees. The idea was to scare it out into the open. For a long time, nothing happened, just that awful silence and the stink. Then there was a movement in the darkness of the cave. Something shifted, and then it came out. It didn't charge. It just emerged, slow, unfolding itself from the shadows. And my God, it was tall. 7 feet was an understatement. It was all legs and arms, covered in this long, shaggy hair that was dark brown and caked with mud and leaves. It stood there on 2 legs, just like a man. But it wasn't a man. Its shoulders were massive, hunched. I couldn't see its face clearly under all that hair, but I could see its eyes. They were dark, and they held a kind of intelligence, but it was a trapped animal intelligence. It looked at us one by one, and it knew we were a threat. Someone, I think it was Elias, had the presence of mind to have brought a lasso, a thick, heavy rope used for cattle. He moved fast, before any of us could even think to raise a rifle. He threw the loop, and it was a perfect shot, settling over the thing's head and one of its huge arms. The moment the rope touched it, the thing let out a sound. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a scream. It was this low, guttural, trapped animal sound, a kind of huffing, choking bellow that came from deep in its chest. It was a sound of pure, primal panic. It was the sound of something that had never known a rope, never known confinement. And the terror of it was absolute. That sound went right through me, a physical thing that made my bones feel weak. It was more frightening than any roar could ever be. It fought, of course. It was unbelievably strong. It took all 8 of us, pulling on that rope, our boots digging into the soft earth, just to hold it. It wasn't thrashing wildly. It was a powerful, deliberate resistance, like trying to hold back a falling tree. Its strength was terrifying. We managed to get its arms pinned, wrapping more rope around it until it was finally trussed up, still making that awful, huffing, desperate noise. We were all panting, covered in sweat and mud, our hearts hammering in our chests. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was a shaky, nauseous relief, mixed with a deep, unsettled feeling. What had we just caught? We took it back to Benton. It was a long, silent walk. The thing didn't fight anymore. It just walked, its head down, making that low sound every now and then. It was heavy, a dead weight between us. We lodged it in an old log building on the edge of town, the kind used for storage. It was the strongest thing we had, with a heavy door and a bar across it. We put it inside and barred the door, and for a moment, we all just stood there, listening to the silence from inside. The whole town had gathered, but they kept their distance, their faces pale and scared. We thought that was it. We thought it was over. It got dark. A few of us stayed nearby, just in case, sitting around a small fire, not talking much. The fear was still there, but it had changed. It was a quieter fear now, a dread of what we had locked up just a few yards away. Then we heard it, a splintering sound from the log building. It wasn't loud at first, just a sharp crack. Then another. We jumped up, grabbing our rifles. The sounds from inside changed. The low huffing stopped and was replaced by a new sound, a tearing, ripping noise. It was tearing its clothes off. We hadn't even thought about the ragged scraps of cloth it had been wearing. We heard the ropes strain and then snap, one by one, like they were nothing but twine. Then there was a final, tremendous crash, and the heavy bar on the door didn't just break. It exploded outward, shards of wood flying into the night. The door swung open and it stood there, silhouetted in the moonlight. It was free. And it was naked now, just this massive, hairy form, bigger and more terrifying than before. It threw its head back and let out that sound again, that trapped animal bellow, but this time it was a cry of fury and freedom. And it echoed through the quiet town, a sound that seemed to shake the very houses. It was the most primal thing I have ever heard. It was our fear, given a voice. For a second it just stood there, and its eyes swept over us. I felt frozen, completely paralyzed. Then it moved. It didn't run like a man. It loped, a powerful ground-eating gait, and it vanished into the darkness, heading straight for the dense cane brakes along the river. The chaos that followed is a blur, shouting, dogs barking, men running in every direction. The terror of that moment, seeing it break free, hearing its cry, that was the true horror. It wasn't the capture, it was the moment we realized we never really had it contained at all. We had just temporarily inconvenienced something far wilder and stronger than we could comprehend. We went after it again, of course. We had to. The fear was too great to let it roam free. It took us most of the next day, but we found it again, deep in the cane brakes. It was exhausted, cornered. It didn't fight this time. It just looked at us, and the intelligence in its eyes was gone, replaced by a flat, weary resignation. We roped it again, more carefully this time, with more ropes, and led it back. What happened to it after that, I don't rightly know. I heard stories, that it was shipped off to a circus somewhere, that it died in captivity, that it escaped again for good. I don't know. I never asked. I didn't want to know. The thing that stayed with me, the thing that still wakes me up at night, wasn't its size or its strength. It was that sound, that trapped animal sound it made when the rope first touched it, and the look in its eyes in that cave mouth. It wasn't the look of a monster. It was the look of a living thing, something that knew it was being hunted, something that just wanted to be left alone in its deep, dark woods. We went out there thinking we were hunting a beast, but we ended up capturing something that was too human in its fear and too wild in its soul, and handling it. Seeing that wildness up close left a stain on me. It left all of us unsettled, I think. We'd touched the edge of a legend, and the legend had looked back at us with dark, knowing eyes. And then it broke our ropes and our door and our confidence like they were nothing. And its cry echoed in the Arkansas night, a sound I can still hear if the wind is right and the house is quiet. I never went back into those deep woods again.